Hello everyone, I know you are watching this video to accompany your sleep. So, if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also don't forget to tell me where you are from, and what time you watched this video. And let's begin. It was a late fall evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Portland, Oregon. The air outside was crisp, with leaves rustling in the wind, and the occasional sound of a car driving by in the distance. My best friend, Kenzie, was coming over for a sleepover. We were both 16, and it was something we did almost every weekend. My parents worked early mornings, so by the time Kenzie arrived, they were already asleep. The house was dimly lit, cozy, and quiet, almost too quiet. Kenzie had soccer practice that ran late, so she showed up around 9:30 p.m. She came straight up to my room, a small but comfortable space with soft fairy lights strung along the walls, a stack of books on my nightstand, and a warm fleece blanket tossed over the bed. We talked for a while, catching up on school gossip and laughing about trivial things. The atmosphere was light, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Around 10 p.m., the house fell completely silent. My parents were sound asleep in their room down the hall, and the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only noise breaking the stillness. Kenzie and I were in the middle of talking when we heard the faint sound of the front door opening. My bedroom was upstairs, so the sound was distant but unmistakable. It creaked slowly, the hinges giving a low groan as it swung open. My heart skipped a beat. I immediately dismissed the idea that it was anything unusual. Maybe my dad had gotten up to grab something from outside, though I couldn't imagine why. Kenzie looked at me, her expression mirroring my unease. We both froze, straining to hear what would come next. Moments later, the door clicked shut, followed by the faint sound of footsteps across the wooden floor of the entryway. An icy dread crept over me. It couldn't have been my dad. I would have heard him walk down the stairs first. Kenzie whispered that she might have accidentally left the front door unlocked when she arrived. The realization made my stomach turn. Someone had entered the house. The footsteps were light and deliberate, moving through the entryway toward the living room. Whoever it was didn't rush or stumble. They moved with eerie precision. I motioned for Kenzie to stay quiet as I tiptoed to the door of my bedroom and slowly cracked it open. From the hallway, I had a partial view of the staircase that led down to the front door. The faint glow of the street lamp outside cast shadows across the floor. I stood there, barely breathing, waiting. And then he appeared. A man stepped into view at the bottom of the stairs, his back turned to me. He was tall and wearing dark, nondescript clothing, a hoodie and jeans. His movements were smooth, almost calculated, as if he knew exactly where he was going. For a moment, I was paralyzed, unable to process what I was seeing. He didn't belong here. I pulled back into my room and closed the door as quietly as I could. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and motioned for Kenzie to follow me into the closet. We squeezed into the cramped space, surrounded by shelves of clothes and shoes, the darkness pressing in around us. My fingers fumbled as I dialed 911. As we waited for the operator to pick up, we heard faint sounds coming from downstairs. The intruder was moving around, his footsteps methodical. I couldn't tell what he was doing. He didn't seem to be rummaging through anything or making much noise. It was as if he was just walking. I whispered our situation to the operator, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way and urged us to stay hidden. My heart pounded as we sat there in silence, clinging to the faint hope that the stranger would leave before the police arrived. Then, as suddenly as he had come, we heard the front door open again. The soft creak of the hinges made my skin crawl. The door clicked shut, and the house fell silent. For a moment, I dared to hope that he was gone. I crept out of the closet and crossed the room to the window, peering through the blinds. The street outside was empty, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. The man had vanished into the night. By the time the police arrived, the house was still unquiet. Officers searched every room, but there was no sign of forced entry, no indication of what the man had wanted. Nothing was stolen, and nothing was disturbed. It was as if he had come and gone without leaving a trace. The officers asked us if we had seen his face, but I hadn't. The shadows had obscured his features, leaving only the haunting image of his silhouette burned into my memory. They assured us they would patrol the neighborhood, and advised us to keep the doors locked at all times. That night, I couldn't sleep. Even after the police left, and my parents reassured me that everything was fine, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. Someone had walked into my home, into my safe space, and left without explanation. The sound of the front door opening echoed in my mind, replaying over and over like a broken record. Weeks passed, and nothing similar ever happened again. But the memory stayed with me, a constant reminder that sometimes the safety we take for granted can be shattered in an instant. Even now, years later, I double-check every lock before going to bed, haunted by the thought of what could have happened if the man hadn't decided to leave. And to this day, I still wonder, why did he come, and what was he looking for? When I was 11, I attended a birthday sleepover at my friend Adam's house. Adam lived in a small, older home in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. His house had a cozy charm to it, with creaky wooden floors, floral-patterned curtains, and warm, yellow lighting in every room. The basement, where we planned to spend the night, was a typical suburban setup. It was partially underground, with small windows near the ceiling that peeked out at ground level. There were 6 of us at the party, all packed into the basement. The room was carpeted with a soft, faded beige rug, and the main living area featured a large TV and a couple of worn but comfortable couches. Around us, scattered sleeping bags and pillows marked where we would eventually settle down for the night. The plan was simple: pizza, a movie, and staying up as late as possible, fueled by candy and soda. The evening started uneventfully. We ate pizza around the coffee table, joking and talking loudly, drowning out the soft hum of the furnace that kicked on occasionally. After dinner, we migrated to the couches and started a movie. I don't remember much about the movie now. It was just background noise to our chatter and occasional bursts of laughter. As the night wore on, the room grew darker. The only light came from the glowing TV screen, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The small basement windows behind us reflected the dim light of the room, but they also revealed the inky blackness of the night outside. The air felt colder, and the laughter slowly faded into a comfortable silence as we focused on the movie. I don't know what made me look back at the window. Maybe it was a shift in the shadows, or the way the light from the screen danced differently across the glass. But when I turned my head, I saw him. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the light or my tired eyes playing games with me. But then the figure moved. A man was staring in through the small window. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but I could make out the shape of his head and the pale glint of his eyes. He didn't blink. He didn't move, except for the subtle shift of his head, as though he were studying us. I nudged the friend sitting next to me. When he turned and saw the man, his reaction confirmed what I already feared. It wasn't my imagination. The others noticed the commotion and turned to look. For a moment, there was a collective silence in the room, a stillness that felt like the world had stopped spinning. And then panic. We scrambled off the couches, our movements frantic and disorganized. Someone tripped over a sleeping bag, sending a pillow skidding across the floor. The room erupted in whispers and half-formed words as we debated what to do. Eventually, Adam took charge, running upstairs to wake his parents. His parents came down quickly, his dad armed with a flashlight. He shone the beam toward the window, but the man was gone. The grass outside the window was undisturbed, the yard still and quiet under the faint glow of a distant street lamp. Adam's dad went outside to check, circling the house and peering into the shadows between the bushes. He returned a few minutes later, shaking his head. There was no sign of anyone. The house was locked, the windows secured, and Adam's parents reassured us that it was probably just some passerby who had been curious. But their words did little to calm us. The image of that face at the window was burned into my mind. Still, we tried to settle back down, deciding to finish the movie. Most of us kept glancing back at the window every few minutes, just in case. When the movie ended, we reluctantly turned off the TV. The room plunged into darkness, save for the faint moonlight streaming through the windows. The basement, once warm and lively, now felt cold and unwelcoming. I climbed into my sleeping bag, pulling it up to my chin. The sounds of the house creaking above us and the occasional rustle of the trees outside filled the silence. I woke up sometime later, disoriented. The room was still pitch black, and for a moment, I didn't know what had woken me. I sat up, my heart pounding, listening intently, and then I saw him again. The man was back. He was at the same window, his face pressed closer to the glass this time. His pale eyes gleamed in the faint light, and I could make out more details now. The scruff of his unshaven face, the slight tilt of his head as he peered inside. He was perfectly still, watching. I froze. My breathing was shallow, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it would wake the others. Slowly, I crawled over to Darian, the friend sleeping closest to me, and shook his shoulder. He stirred, groggy and confused, until I pointed to the window. He saw it too. His reaction was immediate. He bolted upright and ran for the stairs. Within moments, the entire basement was awake and in chaos. Adam's parents were called again, and this time they immediately phoned the police. Adam's dad went outside with the flashlight once more, but by the time he got out there, the man was gone. The police arrived shortly after, searching the property and the surrounding streets. They found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing to suggest the man had even been there. But he had. I knew he had. We all knew. None of us slept after that. We sat in a huddle on the couches, the TV turned on to distract us from the silence. By morning, our parents had been called, and we were all picked up early. Adam's dad tried to reassure us one last time, but the hollow look in his eyes told me he was just as unnerved as we were. I never went to a sleepover at Adam's house again. For years, I avoided basements entirely. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes catch myself glancing at windows in the dark, half expecting to see a face staring back at me. The man at the basement window is a memory I'll never forget, a reminder that sometimes, the darkness outside hides more than just shadows. When I was 12, I spent most of my weekends at my best friend Will's house. He lived just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in a quiet suburban neighborhood surrounded by clusters of woods. Will's backyard was particularly large, with patches of grass that stretched toward a thick line of trees marking the edge of the property. We often played outside during the day, losing ourselves in the maze of branches and leaves, but this night was different. This night, the woods weren't inviting, they were menacing. It was a summer evening, and we were in Will's room playing video games. The room was small but comfortable, with posters of sports teams on the walls and shelves filled with action figures and board games. A single window above Will's bed overlooked the backyard. It was open to let in the cool night breeze, as the room had grown stuffy from hours of gaming. We weren't paying much attention to the noises outside, just the occasional chirp of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Then, Will suddenly stopped playing and stared out the window. I asked what was wrong, but he didn't answer immediately. He leaned closer, squinting into the darkness, and then whispered that he thought he saw someone in the backyard. I stood up and joined him, pressing my face close to the screen. At first, I saw nothing but shadows, a mix of trees and bushes swaying gently. Then I caught it, a fleeting glimpse of movement near the edge of the woods. I asked if he knew who it could be, but he just shook his head. He said it wasn't uncommon for neighbors to cut through their yard as a shortcut to another street, but something about this felt off. The figure had been too deliberate, moving slowly, as if observing the house. We debated for a moment about what to do, but curiosity got the better of us. We decided to go outside and check. The air outside was cooler than I expected, and the grass was damp under our bare feet. We stepped cautiously, our flashlights barely piercing the darkness ahead. The yard was eerily quiet now, the crickets having gone silent as if sensing our fear. We started near the house, shining our lights across the bushes and toward the garage. Nothing. Feeling slightly braver, we moved farther out, toward the edge of the woods. I spotted something glinting in the grass. It was one of Will's old footballs, forgotten during a previous game. He picked it up and tossed it to me, and for a brief moment, we relaxed, tossing the ball back and forth as if to distract ourselves from the growing unease. But then we heard it, a soft crunch of leaves followed by another. We froze, both turning our flashlights toward the sound. Standing near the side of the house, partially hidden by the shadow of a bush, was a man. He wasn't moving, just standing there, as if he had been watching us the entire time. His face was obscured by the hood of his sweatshirt, and his hands hung loosely at his sides. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought it might burst. I nudged Will, and we both took a step back, unsure of what to do. The man suddenly turned and disappeared around the side of the house, heading toward the front yard. For a moment, we were frozen, debating whether to follow or run. Will whispered that we needed to get back inside before he tried to come through the unlocked back door. The thought sent a jolt of panic through me, and we sprinted toward the garage door. We made it inside and locked the door behind us, our breaths coming in short gasps. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. But then the door handle rattled. My blood turned cold. The man was trying to get inside. We didn't stick around to see if he succeeded. We ran through the garage and into the house, locking the door behind us as well. Will raced upstairs to wake his parents, while I stayed near the hallway, listening intently. The rattling had stopped, but the house was filled with an oppressive silence. Will's dad came downstairs, flashlight in hand, and checked the locks on every door and window. He stepped outside briefly to look around, but found nothing. The man was gone, as if he had melted into the night. Will's mom called the police, who arrived a short while later and searched the property and the woods beyond. They didn't find anyone. The officers asked us to describe the man, but we hadn't seen his face. All I could remember was the way he stood there, unnervingly still, watching us. They reassured us that it was probably just a trespasser cutting through the yard and told us to keep the doors locked. That night, none of us slept. We stayed in Will's room, the window shut and locked this time, and kept the lights on. Every noise outside made us jump, every shadow seemed alive. By morning, the fear had subsided slightly, but the memory lingered. I continued to visit Will's house after that, though I never felt entirely comfortable there again. The backyard, once a place of laughter and adventure, had become something sinister. Even now, I can't step into a dark yard without remembering the shadowy figure and the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. The man in the backyard remains a mystery, and I'll never know what his intentions were, or why he was there at all. I was 13 when I had one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences of my life. It happened during what should have been an ordinary Friday night. My sister and I were invited to a sleepover at a girl's house she had recently befriended. The girl, Emily, lived on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, in a quiet residential area surrounded by winding streets and small community parks. I had never met Emily or her younger brother, but I figured it would be a chance to meet someone new. When we arrived, Emily's parents greeted us warmly. Their house was welcoming, a typical two-story home with plush carpets, family photos on the walls, and the faint smell of cookies baking in the oven. Emily's brother, Jason, was about my age. He was quiet when we met, barely saying a word, but he didn't seem unfriendly. His room was cluttered with books and random knickknacks, but nothing that hinted at his personality. As the evening went on, Jason and I hung out while our sisters disappeared upstairs. At first, we just sat in his room, the silence awkward and heavy. He didn't seem interested in talking much, so I tried to fill the gap with small talk. But Jason mostly shrugged or gave one-word answers. After a while, he suggested we go to a nearby park. I hesitated. It was already dusk, and I wasn't familiar with the neighborhood. Still, I didn't want to seem rude, so I agreed. The walk to the park was longer than I expected. Jason led the way, his hands stuffed in his hoodie pockets as we weaved through quiet streets. The houses were spaced farther apart here, their yards sprawling and dark under the growing shadows of the trees. The streetlights flickered on, casting an eerie glow over the sidewalks. When we finally arrived, the park looked ordinary enough: swing sets, monkey bars, a small grassy field with picnic tables scattered around. The air was cool, and the night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that makes you notice every little sound. Jason pointed to a large oak tree near the edge of the field and told me to check it out. He said there was something cool behind it. I walked over, half expecting to find a carved name or some forgotten toy. But when I reached the tree, there was nothing, just grass and dirt. I turned to tell Jason there was nothing there, but he was already running. His footsteps pounded against the grass as he sprinted out of the park, disappearing around the corner of a nearby street. I stood there for a moment, frozen in disbelief. I called his name, but he didn't respond. The park was empty now, and the realization hit me. I didn't know the way back to Emily's house. My stomach twisted as I looked around, trying to remember the streets we had taken. Everything looked the same under the dim light of the street lamps, the houses blending into one another. I started walking, retracing my steps as best as I could. Every so often, I would shout Jason's name, but the only response was the distant rustling of leaves in the breeze. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that amplifies every sound. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, and my breath quickened with every turn I took, unsure if I was going the right way. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a small gas station on the corner of a busier street. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow over the parking lot. Relief washed over me as I walked inside. The cashier, a woman in her 40s with a kind face, looked up from her magazine as I entered. I told her I was lost and asked if I could use her phone. She handed me her cell phone without hesitation, and I called my mom. When she arrived, I felt a mix of relief and anger. I explained what had happened, and she immediately called Emily's mom. Apparently, Jason had been back at the house for a while, claiming that I had decided to leave on my own. His parents seemed unconcerned, dismissing the whole thing as a misunderstanding. My mom wasn't as forgiving. She made it clear we wouldn't be returning. Looking back, I still don't understand why Jason did what he did. Was it some twisted prank, or did he have some other motive? I never saw him or Emily again, and to this day, the memory of that dark, empty park and the long walk through unfamiliar streets still sends a chill down my spine. I don't go anywhere with strangers anymore, no matter how innocent it seems. That night taught me a lesson I'll never forget: trust your instincts, because not everyone you meet has good intentions. I was 14 when I had the most terrifying sleepover of my life. My best friend, Emma, lived in a quiet neighborhood in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. Her house was a charming, two-story home with a wraparound porch and large windows that let in plenty of light during the day. At night, though, those same windows became black mirrors reflecting the inside of the house, making it impossible to see what might be lurking outside. It was a Friday evening, and Emma had invited me over to spend the night. We had the whole weekend ahead of us, and her parents were out of town, leaving the house entirely to us. At first, it was exciting, a rare opportunity to have complete freedom. We ordered pizza, stayed in our pajamas, and settled in the living room to watch a movie. The living room was cozy, with a large sectional couch, a soft rug, and an oversized TV mounted on the wall. A single floor lamp cast a warm glow, and the sound of the movie filled the space. The house felt peaceful, but that peace didn't last. At around 10 p.m., just as the movie was ending, the doorbell rang. Both of us froze. Emma's house was tucked away at the end of a quiet street, and it was unusual for anyone to come by unannounced, especially this late. She looked at me, her eyes wide with uncertainty. After a moment, she decided to check the door. She peeped through the peephole, but didn't say anything. When I asked what she saw, she whispered that no one was there. A chill ran down my spine. The street was empty, bathed in the soft glow of the porch light, but there was no sign of anyone. We brushed it off as a prank and returned to the couch, but the uneasy feeling lingered. The house seemed quieter now, the ticking of the clock on the wall suddenly louder than before. We tried to distract ourselves by turning on another movie, but the sense of being watched was hard to ignore. Half an hour later, we heard a sound. It was faint at first, like a soft tapping, but it grew louder. It was coming from the sliding glass door in the kitchen. My stomach twisted as we both turned to look. From where we were sitting, we could see the edge of the door, the curtain swaying slightly as though something, or someone, had brushed against it. Emma grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she called her dad. He told her to lock all the doors and windows and to keep the lights on. We ran around the house, checking every lock, our fear mounting with every shadow we saw through the windows. We returned to the living room, but the tapping continued. This time, it was coming from the front door. It was steady, deliberate, as if someone wanted us to know they were there. We sat frozen, barely breathing, our eyes fixed on the front door. The tapping stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. Minutes passed, then an hour, but the feeling of unease never left. We tried to convince ourselves it was all in our heads, that maybe it really was just some neighborhood kids playing a prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. At around midnight, we heard a loud crash. It came from the basement. The sound was sharp, like glass shattering, and it echoed through the house. Emma grabbed my arm, her face pale, and we bolted up the stairs to her bedroom. She locked the door behind us, and we both huddled in the corner, too scared to speak. Emma called her dad again, and this time, he told her to call the police. The dispatcher assured us that officers were on their way, but those minutes of waiting felt like an eternity. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, sent our hearts racing. Then we heard it, footsteps. Slow and deliberate, they moved through the house, the sound of heavy boots on the hardwood floor. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. How had someone gotten inside? What did they want? The footsteps grew louder, heading toward the staircase. I held my breath, clutching Emma's hand, as we listened to the creak of each step. The sound stopped just outside her bedroom door. My heart felt like it would explode as the doorknob rattled. The lock held, but the intruder didn't leave. Instead, they stood there, silent, the tension in the air so thick it was suffocating. The sound of sirens outside was the only thing that finally broke the silence. The footsteps retreated, moving quickly down the stairs. We heard the front door open and slam shut. Moments later, the police arrived, their lights flashing outside the window. When the officers searched the house, they found the shattered basement window where the intruder had entered. The rest of the house was untouched, as if the person hadn't been looking to take anything. They didn't find anyone in the neighborhood either, and the police told us it was likely a random break-in. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever it was had been watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. I never spent the night at Emma's house again. Even now, years later, the memory of that night haunts me. The sound of those footsteps, the rattle of the doorknob, and the oppressive fear of being trapped will stay with me forever. Some nights, when the house is too quiet, I find myself staring at the windows, wondering if someone might be watching. And I pray that I'll never have to hear those footsteps again. This took place about 10 years ago, with me and my friends, on the night of my 14th birthday party sleepover. But I still can't forget it. So my parents had a garage on our property that they had partly renovated. It had walls and a bathroom, but still had the garage door that rolled up, which wasn't completely sealed. There weren't any curtains on the windows. Remember this detail, as it will be important later. They let us use the garage when we had friends over to hang out. Our property wasn't totally isolated, but the nearest neighbor was nearly 2 miles away. But we never really had any problems on our street, and it was the kind of place where you didn't need to lock your doors. So the day of my birthday party comes. But up until this point, my parents had let my brothers stay in the garage, and I wasn't allowed to have friends sleep there overnight yet. Being the very mature 14-year-old girls we thought we were, I begged my parents to let us have the sleepover in the garage, even though my mom was unsure, but my dad agreed since it was my birthday. After a long day filled with sugar and driving my parents crazy, we finally got ready for the sleepover in the garage, but we had strict instructions to go to bed and turn off the lights by 11 p.m., and it was my responsibility to make sure the garage roller door was locked from the inside. I made sure to lock the door, and we settled in for a night of more sugar and TV. At 11 p.m., we turned off the lights, but couldn't sleep. So we decided to play hide and seek with the lights off, like teenagers do. We were about 3 rounds in, and my best friend was it. I was hiding half behind a cupboard next to the roller door. Everyone was giggling when the first person got caught. Then, I heard giggling coming from behind me. At first I thought it was an echo, because there was no way someone could have found a hiding place behind me, with me up against the wall and door. The second person was caught, and there was more giggling from behind me. Now I was freaking out, but I didn't want to ruin the game, so I quietly moved to a different spot facing one of the windows. It was pretty dark outside, but the moon was bright enough to see shadows. Inside the garage, it was completely dark. I was trying not to get found, when I saw a shadow pass by the window and stop. Now I was sure someone was outside, but I thought it might be my dad, or my oldest brother checking if we were in bed. So I froze. My best friend ran straight into me and started laughing. I quickly shushed her and said, "My dad's outside, we need to get back into bed." We quickly grabbed the other girls and quietly got back into our beds, thinking we had avoided getting into trouble when we didn't hear my dad saying anything. I turned over in my bed, but the shadow was still there. By this time, I was really freaking out. The shadow moved away, then there was scratching on the garage door. This time, the other girls noticed. We all started quietly panicking and got into my bed, hoping whatever it was would go away, or that we were just imagining things because of the sugar. Then the knocking on the door started, along with more giggling. We were freaking out, but didn't scream. I had just gotten a phone for my birthday, but it was still in the house with the other presents. With no way to quietly call my parents, we yelled at whoever was outside to go away. Then there was more giggling and banging on the windows. Now the shadow was pretty big, so it must have been a grown man or a big teenager. We threw a mattress from one of the beds against the window, so they couldn't see us. Then the person went to another window. We decided to hide in the bathroom, leaving the door partly open, so I could see out. The garage door started to rattle and bang like someone was trying to force it open. The giggling never stopped. I gave up and let out the loudest scream I've ever made. The noise at the garage door stopped. We sneaked out and saw the lights on at the house, and my dad running towards us. At the same time, a car started up and drove away from the side of the road. We didn't get a chance to see what the car was before my dad opened the door with the key. He found us 5 hysterical girls and took us to the house. My mom calmed us down and let us all sleep together in their room on the king-size bed, which helped us finally get to sleep. Any sleepovers had to be in the house, and my friends and I were so scared that we all slept with the lights on for the next few nights. Let's just say, it was another 2 years before I could sleep in that garage again. When I was in 6th grade, I had a small group of close friends. There were 4 of us, and we were all girls. So we often had sleepovers and took turns staying at each other's houses. Now our parents all knew each other, and we lived close by, with the farthest house being only 10 minutes away. One sleepover, we were at my friend Caitlin's house, and her 2 cousins were also there. Caitlin had two older sisters and an older brother. They were all very nice and friendly. During our sleepovers, they usually stayed in their rooms and only came out for food, so we never felt like we were bothering them. Her brother would let us play with his PS2 sometimes, and her sisters would talk to us about boys and high school gossip, which we thought was really cool. Caitlin had a great relationship with her siblings, but it was different with her cousins. One cousin was in 8th grade and was closer in age to Caitlin's older sister, who was a freshman in high school, so she stayed in her room. The other cousin was a boy who was a junior in high school. The girl was nice, but a bit shy. The boy, however, gave me the creeps. He was more outgoing, but something about his behavior was strange. When he smiled, it seemed like he was smiling at something in his head, not at you. He had shoulder-length stringy and greasy dirty blonde hair. He was very skinny for his age. Later, when we were in Caitlin's room, she told us that she had just recently met her cousins as their moms had a fight and didn't talk to each other for a few years. They recently reconnected, so they thought it would be a good idea for Caitlin's aunt and her children to visit for the weekend. Caitlin said her girl cousin was nice, but thought the boy was weird, and since he arrived, he tried to hang out with her instead of her brother. He would go into her room and look through her toys and books to try to talk to her. He was also kind of touchy. He would pet her cheeks and hair. When she flinched or moved away, he would get a cold look in his eyes and stare at her for a few seconds before smiling that creepy smile. We all agreed it was really weird, but then we moved on and talked about the usual things 6th graders talk about. We watched a movie before bed and took turns using the bathroom in the hallway that Caitlin shared with one of her sisters. The oldest sister had her own bathroom to brush our teeth. Everyone called dibs on their turn, and since I didn't mind, I was the last one to go. When my friend Lucia came back and told me she was done, I was relieved because I was getting tired and just wanted to brush my teeth, lay in bed, and gossip until we all fell asleep. I walked down the hallway and opened the bathroom door. I was so distracted that I didn't see Caitlin's cousin in there until I turned on the lights. I quickly apologized and closed the door. At that moment, I wanted to run back to the room. He was in the bathroom with the lights off. From what I saw before I shut the door, he was just sitting on the closed toilet. Before I could leave, he opened the door, smiled at me, and told me to go ahead. I didn't really care about brushing my teeth at that point, but I didn't want to run away and make him react. This is when things got really creepy for me. I opened the door, and he was still there, waiting with a smile on his face. He said, "Let me walk you back to your room." I didn't know what to say, but he took my silence as a yes. Before I knew it, he grabbed my right hand and walked with me back to Caitlin's room. His hands were really warm and sweaty, even though he didn't seem sweaty or warm. I felt so numb, and I could hear my own breathing. I honestly felt like I might pass out. When we finally reached the room, he let go of my hand and said goodnight, then went back to the room he was staying in, which we passed on the way to Caitlin's room. I went back inside, and I guess I looked upset because my friends came over and asked what was wrong. I told them what happened, and they all agreed it was really weird. Caitlin said she would talk to her mom in the morning. I hoped that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. Now, we weren't allowed to lock doors during sleepovers, and it's usually fine, but not this time. I must have been asleep for a few hours when Caitlin started shaking me to wake me up. She had been awake for a while, and since I was closest to her, I was the first one she came to. She told me with a shaking voice that her cousin had opened the door to the room twice, that she knew of, and stared in for almost a minute before quietly closing the door. I was really scared when I heard this. He was just watching us sleep through the night. I agreed to climb into Caitlin's bed with her, and we waited. It didn't take long before we heard the door open. We both froze and stared at the door. There was no light in the hallway, and the only light in the room was from the moon outside, but we could still see a silhouette of someone's head peeking through the door. We could feel his eyes on us, and he stared into the darkness of Caitlin's room for a few seconds. We tried not to move so he wouldn't know we were awake, but it didn't help. He let out a small sigh like he was trying not to laugh. "Hey, Caitlin," he whispered, and then just closed the door. Caitlin looked like she wanted to cry. She held on to me, and we just hugged each other and waited to see if he would come back. He never did come back. I guess he knew we were awake, so he didn't bother. We couldn't go back to sleep that night. The next morning, my mom came to pick me up early, and I said my goodbyes. I was glad Caitlin's cousin was still asleep. When I saw Caitlin at school, I asked her what happened after I left. She said she told her mom, and her mom was very worried, and said she would talk to their aunt. I guess Caitlin's mom also told my mom about what happened, as my mom asked me about it later, and wanted to know if anything else happened to me. After that, my mom made sure Caitlin's cousins weren't around, before letting me sleep over at their place again. But fortunately she didn't need to worry, as they never came to visit after that. I don't know if Caitlin's mom had another fight with her sister, or if she just didn't invite them back, but I hope we never see Caitlin's creepy cousin again. I'm a woman in my early 20s, and I had a really creepy experience that still freaks me out when I talk about it. Now normally, I stay over at my boyfriend's place, but my parents were out of town, so I had to stay at their house to take care of the dogs. My brother was also away, and there was no one else to watch them. There are 3 little dogs who can't be alone for obvious reasons. Now I felt pretty okay staying alone at my house, even though it was a bit strange, without anyone else around. Plus, I live right behind them in my 2-story house with my grandmother. But she was also out of town, working as a truck driver, so I was completely on my own. Around 7 p.m. that night, I took the dogs out to the backyard so they could go potty. I let them run around for a while since they're usually inside dogs, and spend most of their time cooped up in the house. But these dogs, I swear, bark at everyone. I'm always telling them to be quiet, but they didn't listen. When the dogs started running and barking at the dark hallway on the side of the house, where there's a back gate that leads to the alleyway, I got up from my seat to see what they were barking at, but I didn't see anyone. I was hoping there was nothing there, and I felt a bit relieved. Feeling a bit scared, I called the dogs to the back door of my mom's house and let everyone inside, then locked the door. Looking back, I didn't really think much about what they were barking at. Then an hour later, my brother came home from his trip with his girlfriend, so it was time for me to head back to my place. Since I live in the house right behind, it was just a quick walk over there. I was glad to have some time to myself before I had to go back the next day to take care of the dogs. I went into my house, went to my room, and started watching some scary videos with all the lights off. It was 11 p.m. when my other sibling came home from work and walked into my room. She said, "Hey, I'm going to my boyfriend's place to spend the night, if that's fine." I said sure, and she started to leave, closing the door behind her. Then, at around 12:55 a.m., I woke up to a noise in my room. I looked to my left, but couldn't see who it was in the dark. I thought it might be my sister using her phone light. Feeling embarrassed, because I was only wearing a t-shirt and night pajamas since it was hot, I freaked out and shouted, "What are you doing?" As soon as I asked her that, she ran out of my room so quickly that I saw her darting towards the stairs. And then I realized it wasn't my sister who was running down the stairs. Then, when I looked more closely with the hallway light on, I saw that it was a man. A grown man was running down the stairs in my house. I couldn't believe it. I got up quickly to follow him, even though it wasn't a smart thing to do. I just wanted to catch whoever had been in my room. I was so angry that someone had dared to enter my home without permission, so I ran after him. I followed the loud footsteps as they ran downstairs and reached the front door. I saw the man leaving through the back gate into the alley where my dogs had barked earlier. While I called the cops, I knocked on my mom's back door, and my brother answered. I told him what happened, and while we waited for the police, he went outside with a bat in case the man came back. I stayed inside the house with his girlfriend, crying. When the police came in, they searched the entire house thoroughly, but found that nothing had been stolen. Then we found out that the man had broken in through a downstairs window that wasn't locked, even though it was closed and didn't have a screen. I should mention that this window is on the side of the house that leads to the back gate into the alleyway I talked about earlier. I can't help but think that since he didn't take anything, he wasn't there to steal or rob. His intentions were probably much more frightening, and it scares me to think about what could have happened if I hadn't woken up that night. Now I have a terrible feeling that it might have been the same person the dogs were barking at earlier, who I couldn't find when I went to check. I live in a small village with 10 to 15 houses. It's very rural, but the highway is just a 5-minute drive away, and the town is about 10 minutes away. If you cross the street, you can walk to the forest in about 10 minutes. On the first day of Christmas, in the afternoon, my partner and I decided to go for a walk, because we were very full from all the food. It was about 5 p.m. and already dark when we left, so we took a big bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and flash, as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a small country road toward the forest, and then turn right onto a gravel cycle path near the edge of the forest. In the middle of the path, you walk through a small part of the forest. It was very dark, and the trees were tall and close together. When we walked in, I saw our flashlight reflect on something, and realized there was a car parked by the side of the path near the trees. This seemed strange to me, as cars are not allowed there, so I felt a bit cautious. My partner shined the light inside the car, and it looked empty. I also saw that the windows were frozen, so the car must have been parked there for a while. A bit in front of the car, I saw a tree with an interesting shape. I asked my partner to shine the flashlight on it, so I could focus better and take a picture with my flash. After I took a few pictures, my partner said, "There's someone standing behind us in the middle of the road, and they're looking at us." No one had followed us the whole way. I had been looking around and behind us from time to time because, at this time of evening, and near the edge of the forest, there can be wild boars. There was indeed a man standing behind us, staying out of the light from our flashlight. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there and looking at us. At first I thought he might be surprised, because it could seem odd to see someone taking photos near your car, especially since it's not even allowed to drive on that path. I decided to stand up and talk to him from a distance, telling him I was just taking pictures of the tree. He didn't respond and just kept standing there. I then asked him if he needed some light, and he said no. It was strange, but I stayed calm, thinking there must be a normal reason for his behavior. Still, my partner and I decided to leave quickly and followed the path to the next village, which took about 5 to 7 minutes to reach. I remembered the letters on his license plate, but not the numbers, and looked it up online. It turned out he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Keep in mind that the country I live in is under a strict lockdown right now, so you're only allowed to travel by car, if it's for very urgent reasons. After we reached the first street light in the next village, we looked back and saw the car coming out of the forest, turning around, and going back in. I saw that he parked again, and turned off the lights. We then took a much longer route home, because I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died, and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police right then. But as soon as I got home, I called them, and gave them all the details. I really regret not memorizing the whole license plate, but it was such a surprise that I didn't think about it at the time. It only seemed really strange to me when I thought about the frozen windows and how he couldn't have walked behind us without being noticed. Plus, he had no light and didn't respond. It seemed like he was sneaking up on us when I was sitting down to take the photo. I think I was very lucky to have my partner, the camera, and the bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I had been alone. When I was about 10 years old, I went to one of my best friend's houses to hang out and then have a sleepover. I stayed over at his place all the time, and he occasionally stayed over at my place as well. His name was Robert, and we were both really into sports and played on the same football and baseball teams. Robert's dad would always throw to us football passes or pitch batting practice to us at his house, which was always fun, but on this time he was out of town on business. Anyways, on this particular night we played video games like we often did until Robert's mom came upstairs to his room and told us both that it was time for bed. We both got ready for bed and Robert went into his bed and I got in my sleeping bag on the floor. I fell asleep pretty quickly but woke up sometime later. I groggily turned over to my other side and got comfortable again. It was pitch black but my eyes slowly adjusted. As they did, I noticed a man in the hallway just outside of Robert's room. I assumed it was Robert's dad, and then I just closed my eyes and went back to sleep. The next morning, Robert and I got up and had some cereal. He mentioned that his dad was coming back home today, and that's when I suddenly remembered about the man I had seen in the hallway last night. It hit me that it couldn't have been Robert's dad as he was out of town. I thought maybe I was dreaming the whole experience, but I really just knew that I wasn't. I told Robert about it, and he seemed really surprised. He told his mom about it too, and after a conversation with me and Robert, we decided to look around the house. I don't know if he fully believed me. We went around the house and started seeing if any windows or doors were open. We eventually got to the basement, the spare bedroom that they had. When we looked inside, we saw it was a complete mess. Robert was shocked and said they hadn't left it like this, and it had been clean the last time he saw it. He also said that they didn't really go in that bedroom much, and the door was usually shut. We suddenly both got the creeps and ran back upstairs and told his mom. She went down and then returned back upstairs a short time later saying she was calling the police. A while later, the police showed up and searched the house. They didn't find the man, but a window in the guest bedroom to the basement was left open. I don't know if the man was already gone, or if he left when he heard us talking about it, but it appeared he had been living in the guest room for several days. A few weeks ago, I helped my friend John move one weekend from an apartment to a small house on the other side of town. It was a pretty tough job, and it was just the two of us, so it took us a while. By the time we were almost done, it was pretty late at night, and we were both exhausted. John had a spare bed that we had moved into the basement. He told me I could sleep there for the night, and then we could finish up in the morning. I took him up on his offer, because I really didn't want to drive the 10 minutes back to my place as tired as I was, plus we still had a few things left to move. It was a pretty comfortable bed he had down there, and it felt great to lay down and close my eyes. I was starting to drift off when I noticed some noises. It sounded like something moving around down there, but I couldn't tell where the sounds were coming from exactly. I looked all around the basement and didn't see anything at all. It was sort of creepy, but I tried my best to just ignore it. The noises continued though, and I thought maybe it was mice or something, which was pretty gross, but as tired as I was, I eventually fell asleep. The next morning after I woke up and went upstairs, John asked me how I slept down in the basement. I told him it was good, but I mentioned the noises I had heard. He then told me that he too had heard noises as well coming from what sounded like the basement, but figured it had to be me making the noises. He said he also heard noises in another area of the house as well. I think we both got a little creeped out by this, but we figured it had to be a mouse, and went on with the job of the rest of his stuff. I was moving a few of the last boxes to the basement, and I guess I was carrying too many and dropped one of the boxes on the floor. When I went to pick it up, I noticed something. In the corner of the basement, sort of under the stairs, there was a little handle sticking out of the floor. It was hard to see and something that you wouldn't pick up unless you looked really close because of how hidden it was. I told John to come over and take a look. He looked closely and then pulled on the handle, and it lifted up a sort of trap door leading to a hidden room in the house. The room was very small, but there was a sleeping bag in it, as well as a few water bottles that were empty. It appeared someone had been living in there, but nobody was there at the moment. Me and John put two and two together from the noises we had heard, and were pretty creeped out. We searched the house, but found no one. After that, we reported the room, and how someone had been living in it. Whoever had been living there never did return. They must have left for good after realizing we were there. Years ago, when I was 12 years old, there was a kid at my school named David who invited me over one day for a sleepover. It was kind of random, and I was sort of surprised by it, because I didn't really know David all that well. We had talked a few times here and there, and he had been new to the school the year before, but we never really hung out at all. I told him I didn't know, but he persuaded me, so I said all right, and I asked my mom when I got home from school. She said yes and drove me to his house after school that Friday. It was my first time being at David's house, and I was still kind of surprised that he invited me over, but I thought it was cool to be making a new friend. He showed me around his house, which was very nice, and we played some video games. David overall just seemed a little bit strange to me. I didn't really know what exactly it was, but I felt like I just didn't really get along with him. We had sort of different interests and things like that, and he just didn't really seem like the kind of guy I would hang out with. Finally, it was time for bed, and I got in my sleeping bag on the floor of David's room, which was a pretty decent-sized bedroom for a kid. It took me a while to fall asleep, but eventually I did, only to be woken up a few hours later. I woke up super sweaty and realized that my sleeping bag was completely zipped up and another blanket was covering my head. I took them off and immediately felt a nice feeling of cooler air. I looked around knowing I for sure didn't put that extra blanket on myself. I thought maybe David did, but why would David do something like that? I looked over and saw David was awake. I asked him why he put a blanket on my head, but he denied it. I knew he was lying, but when I accused him again, he got pretty angry at me. I decided to just try to go back to bed and make it through the rest of the night, and I could go back home in the morning. I was finally able to get back to sleep, and when I woke up it was morning. When I did, I looked around, but David wasn't in the bedroom. I figured he must have gone to the bathroom or something, so I waited there for a few minutes. Eventually, I really had to pee, so I got up to leave the room, but the door wouldn't open. It seemed to be locked from the outside. This was the last straw for me. I was pretty annoyed with how David was acting towards me, and I called my mom on my phone and asked her to come pick me up. I didn't have a good time at all, but I was still glad, I guess, that I gave it a chance to make another friend. David by this point just seemed really strange to me. My mom told me she would come and get me, so I knocked on David's door and called out to him that it was locked, but nobody came. I knocked several more times and even shouted once. I told him I was locked in his room, but I got no response once again. David's house was pretty big, so there's a chance I wasn't hurt, but the whole thing just made me really angry. Finally, David's mom opened the door to his bedroom and told me that my mom was here to pick me up. The way she said it, she sounded almost annoyed. That was another thing that was sort of strange to me, is that David's parents were kind of unfriendly. I was just happy to go home though, and I left without even seeing David at all. It was a Saturday, so I spent the rest of the day just hanging around the house and playing some video games. That night, however, I was in my bedroom, and my mom called out to me that one of my friends was there. I walked out inside David's standing at the front door. He did not look happy. I walked over to him, and he angrily asked me why I left his house so early without even saying bye to him or anything. I told him he locked me in his bedroom, and I didn't even know where he was. He then denied it and responded by calling me a horrible friend and storming off. I really didn't care though. I just went back inside and started playing video games again. But about 15 minutes later, I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking coming from my window. It scared me badly, and I just about had a heart attack. I looked over to my window and saw glass everywhere. Then I saw a rock tumble to the ground. My parents came running into my room and saw the glass. I was all right, and I wasn't near the window. My parents ran over and looked out the window to see David running away down the street. David had thrown a rock through my bedroom window, breaking it. My parents called his parents, and I remember hearing them argue for a little bit before finally hanging up. I don't really know what happened to David after that, but I never saw him at school again. A few years ago, when I went to cosmetology school, our class took a field trip to a big beauty show in a larger city, which was about 2 hours away from our school. The show had demonstrations of the latest hair and nail techniques, and we got to see experts in the field sharing their skills. We split into small groups to share hotel rooms and save some money, so I ended up staying with 3 other girls in one room, and after we checked into the hotel and unpacked, we were all excited because it felt like a fun sleepover before the big hair and fashion show the next day. To celebrate, we decided to go out and grab some drinks and snacks. We wandered around the city, chatting and laughing, and found a nice spot to eat and relax before heading back to the hotel for the night. When we got back to the hotel about an hour later, it was already late, and a few of the girls were a bit tipsy, but we quietly went up to our room. I didn't have anything to drink, because I was almost 21 and couldn't order from the bar yet. We were just relaxing in the room, planning for the next day, when around 11 p.m., the phone in our hotel room suddenly rang. It startled us because, having stayed in hotels many times, I don't remember the hotel phone ever ringing at this late hour. We all looked at each other, confused. I decided to answer and said, "Hello?" Since this was a few years ago, I can't recall every detail of the conversation, but I'll share what I remember. A man on the other end said we hadn't paid for our room, and that one of us needed to come down to the lobby immediately to settle the bill. We were all confused, because we had definitely paid for the room. We had all pooled our money and given it to Molly, and even I watched her pay when we checked in. The hotel wouldn't have given us room keys if we hadn't paid. And on top of that, it seemed really unprofessional to call us at 11 p.m., especially when we might be sleeping. We were all puzzled and started to wonder if something was wrong, or if it was some kind of mistake. So I told him we had paid for the room, and suggested we could handle any billing issues in the morning. But the man insisted that someone had to come down right away, as our room wasn't paid for. He said we wouldn't be allowed to stay the night if someone didn't come down and pay immediately. Honestly, I can be a bit paranoid, but the situation felt so wrong that I wasn't going to let any of us go down to the lobby that night. So I firmly told him that we would stay in our room until someone from the hotel came to remove us, if there was a problem. This made him even more frustrated. He raised his voice and insisted that someone had to come down right away, or there would be consequences, though he didn't say what they would be. I figured if this was really someone from the hotel, they would come to our room, or we would deal with it tomorrow. My classmates were confused and asked what happened. I told them I got a really bad feeling from the call, and explained what went down. They all agreed that we had paid, and that it's unusual for a hotel front desk to call a room after 11 p.m. Nobody came to kick us out. In the following morning, when we went to check out, we asked the person at the front desk about the call from last night, and if we needed to make a payment. They had no idea what we were talking about, and insisted that the front desk would not have called us that late. We all looked at each other, feeling really freaked out, and decided to leave the hotel quickly. The whole situation was so unsettling that we wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. I forgot about it pretty quickly after, because nothing bad happened, and we didn't get kicked out. But now looking back, it seems really scary. Who made that call? And why did they want one of us to come down to the lobby alone in the middle of the night? It still gives me chills to think about it. It was the summer of 1999, and I was spending my vacation with my mom in a small town in New Mexico. The days were hot, and the evenings were quiet, filled with the sounds of crickets. I was a 12-year-old girl with a lot of attitude, always thinking I was much older than I really was. I easily made friends with a few girls who lived just down the street from my mom's house. We spent every moment together that summer, a group of 4 girls who thought we were older and smarter than everyone else. There was Nikki, Katie, Julie, and me. We were part of the last generation to use home phones, play outside on the trampoline until it got dark, and have sleepovers. We watched movies on VHS tapes and listened to music on our Walkmans. At the time, it was normal for kids to walk around town at night, and we rarely locked the front door. We didn't have cell phones or internet. My backyard was surrounded by a concrete wall with a gate, and beyond it was a wide, open desert that seemed endless. The ground was dry, with only dirt, cacti, and small shrubs scattered around. In the distance, you could see mountains, faint and far away. Our small town had a busy railroad track running right through the middle, and the main street was full of gas stations, diners, motels, and a few tourist spots. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and life felt simple. But our parents all gave us the same warnings: stay out of the desert, stay away from the train tracks, and don't walk down the main street at night. But did we listen? Not at all. So Julie, Nikki, and I spent our days exploring the desert, with its wide open spaces and scattered cacti. We'd cross the train tracks, where we'd sometimes see trains passing by. We'd then walk down the main street, past all the gas stations and shops, to get to Katie's house. It felt like a big adventure, and we didn't worry about the dangers we were supposed to avoid. Sometimes we'd walk around until it got dark, and other days we'd go to my house to jump on the trampoline. But on this particular day, we went to Katie's house ready to stay for the weekend, since her parents were out of town. We planned to have a party on the first night. The girls were jumping from a spiral staircase onto a giant bean bag, even though I didn't join in because I was really afraid of heights. Next, we got ready for our sleepover and decided to watch the original Exorcist movie with Linda Blair. It was really scary, and I couldn't sleep. On the second night, we told our parents that Katie's mom would drive us to the movies. But we didn't mention that Katie's parents were actually out of town, so we were on our own. We all got money for the movies, and then walked down the main street to buy junk food at the little store, which is what we called it. I wish I could say we were paying attention to our surroundings, but we weren't. We didn't notice that a man followed us all the way back to the house. Now I should also mention that Katie's parents were very wealthy. They had a big property with many buildings and old cars that her dad was fixing up. Their house had a large, open space with the kitchen, dining area, and living room, all in one big room, with no walls, and it was lined with windows. There were 2 doors, one in the front and one in the back. The day went as planned. We got our junk food and made it home safely. We made pizza in the oven, and for some reason, one of the girls turned on the TV to watch the news. While we were eating, we heard a report about a suspicious man walking down the main street. That was all it said, just suspicious man. A few hours later, something happened that I don't quite remember, but someone said something that upset Julie, and she stormed out of the house. So I went after her and opened the front door. I sat with her on a bench while she complained about the other 2 girls. Then suddenly the air felt tense, and Julie felt it too. I quietly asked if she thought someone was watching us. She gave a small nod, and then we were blinded by bright lights. Someone was in a car in the driveway, shining their headlights directly at us. My heart was pounding as I stood up and pulled Julie out of the spot, where she seemed frozen. As we turned to run inside, the man made a strange sound, like a high-pitched squeal, that suddenly changed into a growl. I was terrified, but I pushed through my fear and hurried Julie and me inside the house. As soon as we got inside, the headlights went off, and it was completely dark again. I locked the door and turned off the lights. By then Julie had calmed down enough to tell the other 2 what had happened, while I checked the back door and turned off every light. I told them to be quiet, and we listened by the back door. I heard the car door close, and I was praying to every god that he would leave. Then right next to my cheek, the door handle started to turn slowly, then quickly. I crawled away from the door and joined my friends. For the next 2 or 3 hours, we stayed completely still, listening to the man banging on every window and door, trying to get inside. The phone was across the room, next to 2 windows. So I finally gathered the courage to run to the phone and call my mom. I told her that we were alone, and someone was trying to get inside. After hanging up, we waited. Julie yelled at the man that we had called the police, and suddenly the banging stopped. We listened as he got into his car, and then we heard that strange sound again, a squeal that turned into a growl. After that, he was gone. My mom and stepdad arrived and checked the whole place. The really scary part was the scratch marks all over the doors and windows. Katie ended up spending the rest of the weekend at Nikki's house, and had a wild story to tell her parents when they got home. Our parents didn't punish us for lying and being reckless. I guess 2 hours of terror from a madman was enough punishment. About 10 years ago, when I was 15, my Aunt Jo, my best friend Lynn, and I decided to have a sleepover on the spur of the moment. We were at my nan's house, gathered in the living room with blankets, watching movies and munching on pizza and chips. By the time it was 11 p.m., we were having so much fun that we decided to stay the night instead of going home. We didn't bother with sleeping bags or setting up separate beds. Instead, we all shared Joe's double bed, deciding to sleep top and tail, meaning some of us had our heads at one end and others had our feet there. Then we were gossiping and goofing around, just like teenage girls usually do. Then around 1 a.m., we thought we should try to sleep, so we turned off the lights and got into bed. Even then, we didn't sleep right away. We kept joking and laughing in the dark, playfully tugging the blanket back and forth. Joe's room is on the first floor upstairs, which is the second floor in the U.S. The room is set up like this. When you walk in the door, the bed and window are straight in front of you. The head of the bed is against the wall with the window. I was sleeping at that end, so my head was near the wall. Joe and Lynn were sleeping the other way, facing the window. I was starting to fall asleep, but I kept hearing a strange noise, like something scraping against the wall outside. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to keep me awake. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind, or maybe a tree branch, but the noise wouldn't stop. I lay there in the dark, my eyes open, hoping I'd get tired enough to fall asleep soon. Then out of nowhere, Joe screamed. She jumped out of bed so fast and yelled, "Get away from the window." Her voice was full of panic. Lynn screamed right after her, and my heart started racing. I quickly turned to look at the window, trying to figure out what was happening. That's when I saw it. The shadow of a person, arms raised, standing right outside the window. We ran downstairs, screaming for my nan. She rushed out from the living room to see what was going on. Joe was crying by now, and Lynn and I were in shock. We all tried to explain what had just happened. Once we finally told her, my nan called the police and grabbed a bat. She went upstairs to check if the person was still there. The person was gone. The police arrived, took our statements, and looked around the area but didn't find anything. They gave us another number to call if anything strange happened again, or if the person came back. We decided to sleep downstairs instead of going back to Joe's room. We were scared and shaken, but Joe was still really upset. This person went up onto the roof and tried to open Joe's window. He had his arms raised, which puzzled me until Joe explained that her window can open from both the top and the bottom. She usually opens it from the top. It turned out that the guy had probably been watching the house for a while, and chose that night to break in. We were lucky to be having the sleepover, because we saw him. If Joe had been alone, she would have been lying in bed with her back to the window, and wouldn't have seen the shadow. The whole thing made us realize how close we came to a much worse situation. My friend moved to a new apartment about a week ago after finishing college, so I planned to stay overnight because we were going to a mutual friend's birthday, and it would be too late for me to go home afterward. Her place isn't fully set up yet, since she's still moving in, but when we arrive, I told her I felt a strange energy, but I didn't think about it much for the rest of the night. We spent time together, enjoy a nice evening, and had some laughs before heading to bed. Then around 2 a.m., we both settled down on the same queen-size bed. But I woke up at 2:30 a.m. to her screaming in my face. She apologized, saying she got scared, as she's not used to sleeping next to someone, after living in dorms for so long. I sleepily calmed her down, she apologized again, and we both turned over and went back to sleep. I often have very vivid dreams, mostly nightmares because of my medication. But that night I dreamed about a creepy clown slowly poking its head through her closet door. The room in the dream looked exactly the same as it did in real life, which made it feel even more real and unsettling. The strange part is, my friend woke up again in the middle of the night. Then she started mumbling about her own dream, saying she saw a clown or some evil figure calling her to the closet. She said she felt scared and didn't want to go near it. I was too sleepy at the time to think about it, so I went back to sleep. Later, when there was a bit of light in the room, probably around 5 a.m., I woke up and saw a short person in a blue t-shirt hurrying out of her bathroom. I was still groggy and confused, unsure of who they were or how they got in, but I was too tired to react. Still feeling very tired, I thought it was just one of her roommates and went back to sleep. We both woke up around 8:30 or 9, and I teased her a little about talking in her sleep. But then, without me saying anything, she told me she had a dream about a clown and described exactly what I had seen in my own dream. At this point, I was really creeped out, but I thought maybe hearing her talk about the dream in the middle of the night made me have a similar dream. Then she went into the bathroom to brush her teeth and noticed that both doors, one leading to the hallway and the other to her bedroom, were open. She panicked because she remembered closing them before. So I casually said, "Oh, it was probably your roommate who got up to use the bathroom." But then she told me that none of her roommates were there because they were signing the lease in September. By now, we were both really scared. She went to check the patio door and found it unlocked and open, even though she always locks it carefully every day. Just so you know, she doesn't have any security cameras. Nothing valuable was stolen, and we thought maybe a homeless person could have broken in. But all the food was still in the kitchen. 2 years ago, something strange happened to my best friend and me, and we still can't figure it out. We've talked about it many times, but haven't found any answers. My best friend and I went to the mountains with 2 other close friends to hike and run. It was winter, and the weather was terrible, with a lot of ice and snow. The parking lot at the start of the trail was close because of some road work, so we had to park a few miles away on a long, empty road. No one else was in the park that day except us. Now, we often go on outdoor trips together, but my best friend and I usually go ahead of the other 2, as we're in better shape and can move faster than them. We usually finish early and wait in the car for the other 2. That day we finished much earlier than usual. My friend and I were jogging back to the car when we saw an old cemetery by the road. I suddenly turned off the road, laughing, and pulled my friend with me to check it out and explore for a minute before heading back to the car, which we could see just down the road. After this, we kept jogging to the car. Once we got there, we started waiting for our 2 friends to finish their hike. About 30 minutes pass, but we still didn't see them. Our car was parked facing the opposite direction from where they would come, so we kept turning around to check and make sure we didn't miss them. In that moment, my best friend and I saw 2 people in the distance running toward us. I said, "Oh, there they are." My friend said, "They're moving fast." But as they got closer, we realized it wasn't our 2 female friends. It was a man and a woman, and they were dressed exactly like my best friend and me. The woman had long blonde hair, just like me, and both of them were wearing hats, just like we were. I said, "Wait, that's not them." We got really confused, and then we both went quiet and started to feel a bit scared. The 2 runners suddenly turned toward the cemetery, with the woman pulling the man, laughing, just like we had done earlier. Then they suddenly disappeared. My best friend and I looked at each other and both said that was us. We just knew it, and it really freaked us out. We were shaken up. A few moments later, we saw our friends walking toward the car from the same direction. We asked if they had seen anyone hiking or running ahead of them, but they said they hadn't seen anyone. We haven't stopped talking about this, and have spent the last couple of years trying to find a logical explanation, but nothing makes sense. This story has been in the back of my mind for about 2 years now, and it's one of the most terrifying experiences of my entire life that I really want to forget. It occasionally pops into my mind, and it still gives me the shivers to this day. It was the end of another school week, a Friday, and as a lot of us teenagers do, we decided to have a sleepover on the weekend. My friends agreed with me, and we happily walked home, talking about what we should do the next day, and where we should go, and all that stuff that you'd expect to talk about. One of my other friends said that we should have a sleepover at his place. I'm not revealing their real names for privacy reasons, so for this story I'll call them X and L, and in case you're confused, it was X that said he wanted us to sleep over at his place. I quietly walked home as I and L split up to go to our own houses to pack up our belongings for the sleepover. I grabbed out my bathroom equipment, sleeping bag, and fresh clothes, and all the other stuff you would need for a sleepover. Once I was finished packing my bag, I had called both X and L on our group chat and told X that I had packed, and I had asked my parents if I was allowed to come, and told them they said yes, and L said the same thing as me. We were all excited, and X said that he'll be waiting at the park down outside his house to meet, since the park was only 2 houses down from his place. I casually walked to the park, which was approximately 10 minutes away. Right as we got there, I saw X and L already at the park. I gave them both a wave, and we all walked to X's house. We all got inside and made ourselves comfortable with our sleeping bags in the living room, because X's room was, well, a tad bit tiny. I think that the time was somewhere around 12:30 a.m. I remember it raining ever so slightly. We were all laughing and giggling about certain events that had happened at school that day, but I guess that isn't really relevant to the story. I told them that we should probably all go to sleep, since it was extremely late, and that I was really tired. Elle then replied, "Alright then, I guess it is a pretty shitty night after all." We had all started laughing at that response, and it eventually got to the point where we started talking less and less, and then eventually falling asleep from boredom. However, I didn't really fall asleep that night. I was rolling over in my bag and just trying to get into a comfortable position to sleep in, but had no luck falling asleep. I had my eyes wide open, staring at the blank ceiling. I looked at both X and L, who were both pretty wiped out into slumber. I got out of my sleeping bag as quietly as I possibly could, and then went into the kitchen to get a drink, but after I had my drink of water, I had heard some type of noise coming from a wall. I didn't really make it out at first, and I kind of had a difficult time trying to figure out what it was, and it was coming from the living room. I carefully went into the living room, and then tried my best not to step on L. I was standing in the middle of the room, trying my best to find out where the hell the sound was coming from. Okay, to give you a bit of context, if you enter the front door of the house, the living room is in the first room that you enter, and the left side of the living room where you enter is a giant window. Well, the tapping sound was coming from that window. My heart was starting to speed up now, but what was the only logical option, you may ask? To look through the window. I told myself to just go up to the window and see what it was, so I proceeded to do so. I stopped. There was something else. The windows were closed by blinds. I leaned my ear closer to the window. Now, along with the tapping, I could also hear breathing. I could barely just hear it over the rain. Very slow breathing. I couldn't say anything. I very slowly backed away from the window. I frantically woke up both X and L in a panic. They both said to me, "What is it?" in a grainy, tired voice. I told them to shush themselves and to listen, however, the tapping and breathing soon stopped. Elle then said, "Dude, I don't hear a thing." I told them what I heard, but they didn't believe me. I was getting mad. But then Elle suggested, "Why don't you just go outside and check?" I immediately said something along the lines of, "Fine, I'll go out there. In fact, why don't you both come out with me just to be sure?" I opened the door quietly and motioned my friends to come outside with me. We got to the window outside the house and nothing. There was nothing there. X said to me, "I told you, I knew there wasn't going to be anything there." We both talked about it for a bit outside, and X said I was crazy, but the story doesn't end there. Out of the blue, Elle nervously said, "Wait, who's that guy over there?" We all looked, and there was a dark silhouette that was just standing still a few houses down the street. He was probably about 5 feet 5 inches, and he was wearing a raincoat from what I remember. My friends both looked at me, knowing that I wasn't crazy. The guy was just staring at us, not moving a muscle, but he then started laughing in a sort of sinister kind of way. Within that moment, I said softly, "Go for the backyard gate, right now, do it." The guy continued to stare at us while we both slid slowly to the gate, which was very close. Suddenly, the guy just full-on sprinted right toward us without warning. My life was in slow motion. I dashed for the gate. All of us got in, and I was actually the last one to get in, and then I locked the gate. The guy ran into the gate with such force, but the gate didn't budge. The gate and fence were really high, and he couldn't possibly get over it. He then started banging and screaming at the gate, yelling things like, "Come on out here and I'll kill you, you dumb teenagers," and I'll honestly never forget that sentence. We made a run for it to the back door of the house and woke X's dad up. He bolted straight outside and said the guy made a run for it and was already halfway down the street. He chased after him, screaming for him to get back here. X's dad called the police straight away. They arrived a little while later with cops. 3 searched the area while 1 stopped to talk to me about it. The 3 cops found nothing except for a long and sharp kitchen knife that was dropped outside the front lawn. I shuddered. One of the policemen asked me if I knew what he looked like, but I couldn't make anything out other than he was somewhere around 5 feet 5 inches and wearing a raincoat. He wasn't seen again after that, and he hasn't come back, but the police that day said they found dirty boot marks right outside the front door. But the really creepy part about the boot marks outside the door is that apparently that door had a peephole, and that peephole could make you see through both ways. Plus, X's house is old, and that guy was possibly spying on us through it. Moral of the story is be very careful during the night, because anything can happen if you're not careful. Before I start this, I just want to say that I in no way blame this on my friend or her mother at all. The story takes place around 2 years ago during the summer of 2019. I was 14 years old at the time, and I had a really big group of friends that I would go to the pool with like almost every day. We all lived only a few houses away from each other, except for about 3 of the girls. There were 8 of us. The day was like every other day. We woke up, put on our bathing suits, and we had our friend Ryan's mom take us to the pool. She happened to have a minivan that could fit us all. We got to the pool around 11 a.m. and swam until about 9 p.m. when the pool closed. Since all of our parents were super close, and we still wanted to keep the fun going, we decided to crash at our friend Ava's house. She had a huge downstairs basement that was soundproof because her dad used to teach guitar and drum lessons to people all the time down there. 2 of our friends, Carly and Aaron, didn't really want to go because they felt really tired and dizzy from being out all day and night. So we said our goodbyes to the 2 of them as their parents came and picked them up, and it only took about 4 minutes for Ava's mom to come get us. She had a smaller car, so we had to squeeze in a little more. When we got to Ava's house, we came inside and thanked her mom for driving us before going to get some snacks from the kitchen. As we walked into the kitchen, we could see Ava's stepdad, David. None of us really liked David since he kind of had a reputation of being really creepy towards us and making rude comments to us whenever our parents came to pick us up. We walked to the cabinets and grabbed all we needed and proceeded to pile down the stairs to the basement. Let me give you a quick layout of the basement. As soon as you walk down the stairs, to your right is sort of a kitchen and work room, and then to your left is a basement living room. And then once you walk past the sofas, there's a pool table. On the left of the pool table, there's a hallway where on the left is a bathroom and storage room, and then to your right is a bedroom. All of us really smelled of sunscreen and chlorine, so we split into groups of 2 and went to each different room to change out of the bathing suits and into clothes. The basement was kind of creepy, and none of us wanted to be alone in any of the rooms due to the previous paranormal experiences we've had there. Ava always had spare shirts that she'd let us wear that used to be her dad's, and since most of us were 5 feet 2 inches and shorter, the shirts covered us enough that we didn't need to wear shorts. And if you're wondering, yes, we washed our hair. We would usually take turns taking a shower, but we were so tired that we just tilted our heads back over the tub and then took turns washing each other's hair. Once we finished with that, we walked to the basement bedroom and got comfortable. We made bracelets, talked about drama and the new school year coming up, eat junk food, drink Pepsi, and then watch the new season of Stranger Things. After around 3 hours of this, our friend Ryder was asleep on the bed while the rest of us sat on the floor talking. While Ava was halfway through her sentence, we heard the stairs of the basement then creaking. All of us were silent. Ava said it could just be one of her cats or something, but before she could even finish, we then heard around 6 more steps from the basement stairs area. Ryan, the oldest of us, seemingly the most freaked out, quietly walked to the door and locked it while me and my friend Molly went to turn off the lights. We waited around 5 minutes, the only light coming from the computer screen that we'd been watching Netflix on. We quietly whispered about what the noise could be, until we heard sliding footsteps coming into the hallway of the basement. Me and Ava grabbed onto each other as everyone else fell silent. After about 2 minutes of hearing nothing, we all then moved to the bed. While doing this, we managed to wake up Ryder, who then loudly asked, "What the hell are y'all doing?" Ryan covered his mouth with his hands while telling him what was going on. Ryder, who hates when people wake him up, sat up and told us to calm down, or in his own words, chill the fuck out, as he walked to the basement bedroom door and unlocked it. He swung the door open, and what we saw made us all stiff as a board with fear. There in the doorway was Ava's stepdad. Her stepdad was terrifying. He was 6'4", short brownish hair, heavy set, and he had these square glasses that could reflect about anything. Me and everybody else in the room screamed to the top of our lungs as Ryder slammed the door in his face, locked it, and ran into the bed into me and Ryan's arms. We all stayed as silent as possible as we waited for what felt like hours as we heard Ava's stepdad groaning and asking if he could join us. Our friend Dizzy and I began to cry while Ava called her mom to come down and get him. After I'd say about 45 minutes, all was silent, and we ended up falling asleep piled up on top of one another. We woke to the sound of Ava's mom knocking on the door. We then unlocked it and let her in. She then explained to us how after she brought David back up, he then told her that many young girls down in the dark basement all by themselves is really dangerous. Anything could happen, and no one would hear anything. Thank goodness those two boys were in there, and were smart enough to lock the door in case anyone tried to do anything. When her mom told us this, I felt sick to my stomach. When I looked over, I saw the look of pure horror and disbelief on everyone's faces. After that, we all decided to go home. I'm 16 years old now, and Ava's stepdad passed away due to the coronavirus. Me and those girls aren't as close anymore, but that night and all the other experiences we've had since then have stayed between us, and they probably always will. I'm a female, and at the time this story occurred, I was 15. My best friend Ellie would spend a lot of time in my house. I kind of just assumed that this was because she had two younger siblings that she didn't really get along with well, and the father wasn't in the picture, and their mom was gone most of the time. Every weekend, Ellie would stay at my house. On this particular weekend, I had asked Ellie if maybe we could stay at her house instead. I was just kind of wanting a break from my parents, and I had never stayed over at Ellie's house before. Her mother said that it would be fine, and that she wasn't going to be home much anyway. We went to Ellie's house straight after school on a Friday. We sat down on the couch, and we had watched some TV for a bit. After a while, we decided we wanted a snack, and we went into the kitchen to see what we could find. They had a side door, and their kitchen was open with a screen on the outside. I was very startled when I saw a man standing in front of the screen door, looking inside. He looked to be in his late 30s, and he was really dirty and shaggy looking. I actually wondered if he was homeless. Once we made direct eye contact with him, he then said, well, hello there, young ladies. Dave, Ellie said. She told this guy Dave that her mom wasn't there. The man replied back, yeah, she never is. Who's your little friend here? He asked as he creepily looked me up and down. She told him I was her friend, and that we were just hanging out having a sleepover. Ellie seemed uncomfortable, and I was too. He stood there for a moment just smiling at us when he then said, so are boys allowed? I'm sure a couple of cuties like you have boyfriends coming over. We grew increasingly uncomfortable, and Ellie told him that she had to watch her brother and sister for the night, and that her mom would be home later. I knew that wasn't true though. Her siblings were staying at her dad's that weekend, and her mom would be going out with, so most likely she wouldn't be coming home. The man was still standing at the door smiling at us. He then said, oh well, I guess. Tell your mom I stopped by. See you sexy ladies later. When the man walked away, I asked Ellie what was that all about. She told me that Dave was her neighbor. Apparently her mom had gone on a date with him several years ago when they first moved in. Her mother wasn't impressed with Dave, and there was no second date. She said that he was cheap, had bad hygiene, not at all interesting, and was far too forward sexually. I guess this Dave character would stop by frequently trying to get the mom's attention, and then flare with her, much to everyone in the household's dismay. Ellie also said in the last couple of years, he seemed to start taking more interest in her, even making the horrific comment about how she's grown up enough to wear bras now, and suggesting that she should come over in a bikini to sunbathe on his dick. I was totally horrified. What a creep. We tried to relax some, and forget about the creepy neighbor. We ate some junk food, watched some of our favorite shows, and also took some quizzes out of teen magazines. It was getting dark, and we were starting to want dinner, so we ordered a large cheese pizza. Not even 10 minutes later after the pizza had arrived, there was a knock at the front door. We were both really surprised as it was going on 9 p.m. at this point, and we weren't expecting anyone. Ellie got up and looked out the peephole. She looked right back at me wide-eyed. She put her finger up to her mouth and told me to be quiet. There was another knock at the door, then a voice. It was Dave. Girls, I know you're home, he said. We were both frozen in fear. Then Dave the creep said something along the lines of that he knew we were alone, and saw that we were hungry for a pizza, and so he thought he'd bring us a large sausage. Yeah, I know, cringe. After a few minutes of not responding, Dave said something about us being stuck-up little girls, and then left. We went around the house closing all the blinds, and making sure all the doors were locked. We were so scared that we barely had the volume of the TV up, and kept the room lit with one tiny dim lamp out of fear of Dave seeing or hearing us. Once it got to be around 10:30, we were really fed up with having to sit still in the dark. Ellie got up and peeked out the window at Dave's house. She said that all of his lights were off, so he probably went out or went to bed. We felt comfortable enough to turn on some lights and relax a bit, so we put on some music and chatted some. We were sitting on the piano bench in front of the dining room windows when all of a sudden we then heard a tapping outside the window. I guess we had only closed the shades halfway because when we looked over, you guessed it, there was Dave peeking in. He held up a six-pack of beer saying that he knew Ellie's mom wasn't home and that we should let him in so we can all party together. I guess Ellie had enough at this point because she stood up and yelled at him, no, and that he needed to leave. Dave had a completely blank look on his face, and then he said, "You know I can just come in, right?" Ellie then yelled at him that she had spoken with her mom, and she was calling the police. Well, at that point Creeper Dave started to back away, saying he was just kidding and that we needed to calm down. Ellie stood her ground until she knew Dave was in his house, then proceeded to call her mom's boyfriend's house. She told her mom all the creepy things Dave had been doing, but her mom didn't believe us, and she thought we were making things up. She said we should just go to bed and everything would be fine. Ellie was so upset. We ended up locking ourselves upstairs in her mother's bedroom. We didn't have any more problems with Dave that night, and we finally got some sleep. After that night, as you can imagine, we decided to just go back to sleepovers at my house, and I think that's for the best. This is cliché, but I've never been one to really believe in ghosts or the supernatural. I think this is important to note because I want you to know just how real this event was to me. It's the one event that I haven't been able to blame on the wind or my eyes playing tricks on me or being so tired that I just heard things. It wasn't any of that. When I was 12 years old, I had a sleepover planned at my best friend's house for a Friday night. Let's call her Kelly. I'll explain the layout of the room we were in because it'll be important later. Kelly lived in a pretty big house, but we always slept in the downstairs living room so that we wouldn't wake her parents upstairs, as we usually stayed up pretty late. This living room was huge. On one side were two big couches, a TV, and a pool table. On the other side, about 20 feet away, was a bookshelf with these big glass cabinets. There wasn't really much in it. It had what looked like really old files from her dad's job. I had seen some cool books in it a few weeks back, but Kelly told me the bookshelf cabinets are always locked because her dad says there's important paperwork in there. So anyway, after watching some movies and talking, it's about midnight, and I go to the upstairs bathroom to brush my teeth while Kelly sets up some blankets on the couches. As I'm brushing them, I look into the mirror and I see into the big glass shower. Through the reflection, I then see a shadow, and it startled me because it was a lot darker than a shadow anything else in the room could have made. More specifically, I could clearly see the outline of a little boy. There were no features, it was just transparent, but somehow still unmistakable despite this. It didn't feel threatening though. In fact, I felt somehow safe, but I was still freaked out. I then whip my head around, and of course nothing's there. I shake it off, and then look back into the mirror, nothing. I take out my contacts and look back up, and there it is again. Same exact place as before, but still clear despite my not so great vision. I'm officially as terrified as a 12-year-old can be, and decide to leave my stuff in the bathroom, and just deal with it in the morning. I run down the stairs and tell Kelly what I saw. I won't lie, I then started crying as I told her. I was trying so hard not to make a big deal over a little shadow, but it looked so real to me. I must have been making quite a commotion, because Kelly's mom comes down the stairs to see what was going on. She says she saw a shadow in the bathroom. Kelly says to her mom. Without missing a beat, Kelly's mom looks at me with a distant look and a rise. In the shower? She says. I nod. Did it look like a boy? We both say in unison. My face is white, and her mom then says, I've seen him before as well. Nothing to worry about. And she just goes upstairs. She doesn't try to comfort me. She just goes upstairs as quickly as she came down. Well, needless to say, I couldn't really sleep that night. I must have dozed off sometime around 2 a.m., because at 3 a.m., I then awoke to a loud banging noise. It sounded like it came from right next to me. I didn't have the courage to investigate, so I got fully under my blanket and then went back to bed. I woke up the next morning before Kelly and looked down next to me, almost completely forgetting what had happened the night before. Now on the floor by my head was a really huge photo album, just laying there, open. I look over at the bookshelf, and the cabinets are now wide open. I guess they weren't always locked like Kelly said. The album was opened up to a page with a single photo on it, that of a little boy looking really happy and sitting on a set of swings. It hadn't clicked for me yet. At breakfast I told Kelly's mom, and she said she was certain that there was no way that album could have fallen 20 feet over to me in the middle of the night. She looks at the photo, and her face goes white. But who is that, I ask. Kelly's mom then softly says, that's my brother. He died when he was 6. I'm 15 now, but when this story happened, it was on my 8th birthday. My mom invited her friend over for the party, and her friend brought her kids. Let's call them Sally, Billy, and Lily. Fast forward to after the party had ended, when me and my siblings, Sally, Billy, and Lily were having a sleepover. We were all watching a horror movie. I think it was Nightmare on Elm Street, but I can't really remember for sure, when I then said I wanted to play hide and seek with them. Apparently everyone else was just as bored as I was with the movie, because they all jumped up at the idea, and we played rock, paper, scissors to see who would be the seeker. My oldest brother, Charlie, ended up being the seeker, and he went down the hall to go count in the bathroom. To understand this story fully, I'll explain how the house was built. When you walk into the house through the front door, you immediately see the first stairway to your left. Once you go up the stairs, to your right on your left is the room where we were watching the movie in, which was my brother Justin's room, and my sister Charlene's room was straight forward. You turn left on the stairs, and you'll see my room on the right side, and if you turn left, you'll see my mom's room. You keep going down the hall and turn right, and you'll see 3 doors and another stairway. If you go straight, you'll reach the lining closet, and the stairway is left of it. You go back and turn left, you'll see 2 doors, one to the left and one straight ahead. The one to the left was Charlie's room, and the door straight ahead was the bathroom he was counting in. Now going back stairs to the front door past the stairway, you can either go straight or left. If you go straight, you'll be in the living room, and if you go left, you'll see 2 doors, one straight ahead, and then one left of you. The one on the left of you was a random room that was under the stairs, and the one ahead of you led to the second living room that we really didn't have anything in. If you keep going, there's a doorway to your left that leads to the dining room. Once you're in the dining room, there's a door to your left, which is the side door that went outside, and the one to your right leads to the kitchen. If you go into the kitchen, you'll see 4 doorways. One to your left as soon as you walk in that leads to a patio type thing. Turn right and walk to the farthest wall, and you'll reach the second bathroom. From the second bathroom, you go straight to the 3rd floor, which leads to the basement. Then you turn right, and there's a second stairway leading back upstairs. We also had an attic as well, but to go there you have to go through the upstairs bathroom. Anyways, Charlie went to go count in the bathroom, while the rest of us went to go hide. I ran downstairs, and I decided to hide behind the couch. I was a dumb 8-year-old kid. Now at the time, one of my uncle's friends named Scott was staying with us, and he was on the couch drunker than ever. He wasn't really bothering any of us though, so it didn't really matter. I remember watching Lily come downstairs looking for a hiding spot, and she came to hide with me for some reason, I didn't really think much of it, since I thought that this hiding spot was a really genius place to hide at. Once Charlie was done counting, he came to look for everyone. I also forgot to mention that we were playing hide and seek in the dark, so I guess that makes the story scarier. Anyways, Charlie quickly started finding everyone, and I was still just squatting behind the couch with Lily, when all of a sudden Scott started laughing hysterically for some reason, and then pointed at the ceiling. He then started saying something loudly. I can't really remember exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of, "Oh, look at that, they're coming to get you, they're all coming to get you." I was confused and kinda scared all at the same time because of this, and I'm guessing Lily noticed because she put her hand on my shoulder, then sang, "You'll be okay, Sierra. It'll all be okay." I got even more scared hearing her talk because her voice sounded distorted. I don't know. I went to look back at her and asked what was wrong with her voice, but then saw her hand. Her hand looked really bony, and it was a pale color. This really concerned me because Lily at the time was a plus-size black girl. I looked at what I thought was her, but then seen something really horrific. I saw some kind of gremlin-looking thing with really big facial features. Its black eyes, ears, and mouth were giant and didn't look like they even fit on the thing's face properly. I screamed. I screamed so loud, and then instantly jumped over the couch trying to get the fuck away from whatever that thing was. Obviously Charlie heard me, and then came in the room watching as I ran back upstairs away from that thing. The thing literally chased me until I ran back into Justin's room, slamming the door shut. Everyone came back in the room and asked me what happened, and I told them what I had seen. According to Lily, she hadn't even gone into the living room at all for that round. She was with Charlene hiding in the dining room under the table, and according to Charlie, he didn't see anything chasing me up the stairs. Justin all of a sudden started freaking out, and Charlie asked him what was wrong, and he then told everyone to look in my back. I tried looking in my back, and I had seen a lot of red on my salmon-colored shirt, wondering what it was. Charlie lifted up my shirt and seen 4 huge scratch marks going from my right shoulder to the left side of my back. It was weird because at first I didn't even feel the blood or scratches on my back, but then it started stinging really badly, and I started crying. Charlene then asked me if I still wanted to play hide and seek, but of course I didn't. I was way too scared, so I told them to just keep going without me, and that I'd just stay in the room we were in. Justin volunteered to stay there with me so that I wouldn't get scared again, and everyone else went to go play another round. Justin was about to bring me to the bathroom to clean the cuts out, until he stopped outside the bedroom door. By this time, everyone had already found a hiding spot, so when he told me someone was sticking their head out of Charlie's bedroom, it was a bit weird. I walked into the hallway and looked, and seen the head going back into the room. The head was just pure white. It kind of looked like it was glowing. Also, the hallway light was on outside the bathroom for some reason, and that's why we were able to see it. From what my brother saw, he said it didn't have any facial features, and it had a really narrow neck. It couldn't be any of us because no one in the house was tall and skinny like that thing was. As soon as I saw the thing, I then screamed again and ran back in the room. Once again, everyone came rushing back and asking what happened. This time Justin told them and asked Charlie if it could have been him, but he said that he hadn't even gone in his room. Everyone then agreed that we'd all just stay in one room for the night and just continue watching movies until we fell asleep, minus when my sister brought me to the bathroom to clean the blood off my back and then had me change the now blood-covered shirt I was wearing. It was hard to get sleep that night because of how much the scratches hurt, but eventually I did. In the morning, my sister brought me back in the bathroom to see if my cuts were bleeding anymore, and they weren't, but only because they were no longer there, like they had totally disappeared off of me, as if they were never there to begin with. In conclusion, I'm so happy that I no longer live in that house. I moved out when I was going into the 5th grade, and gladly the house is now abandoned. I never did find out what the hell that thing was, and I don't know if I want to, but it's definitely one of the craziest and scariest things that's ever happened to me. I was 16 at the time of this story. I had recently gotten my license, and I was really enjoying the freedom of being able to drive myself wherever I wanted. I'm older than most of my friends, so I was the only one in our group to have my license during this time. Because of this, I would often spend my weekends driving around town with my friends, Brooke and Mackenzie, before eventually spending the night at one of their houses. This particular Saturday was no different. I made some plans to pick up Brooke and Mackenzie sometime in the later afternoon to drive around and go shopping and eat at fast food places. Then we planned on spending the night at Brooke's house since her parents were out of town. So when the time finally came, I picked up my friends and we had a really great time, shopping in stores and eating some really good junk food, then eventually went to Brooke's to spend the night. We spent a couple of hours hanging out in Brooke's basement, eating more junk food and drinking soda while listening to music. After a while, my stomach began to hurt, so I got up to use the bathroom. Now, Brooke's basement didn't have a bathroom, so I had to go to the one upstairs. The moment I sat down to do my business, I immediately felt uneasy from the window next to me that looked out into the pitch-black night sky. I planned on finishing up and getting back downstairs as soon as possible to be back with the others. Then a few seconds later, my worst nightmare came true. I heard a slight tapping on the window from the outside. I froze in fear. I didn't want to scream to give myself away. I really wanted to get up and just run back down to the basement, but unfortunately, I was still in the process of doing my business. All the junk food came back to bite me. I was trembling with fear, trying to finish as soon as I could. I also realized that I had left my cell phone down in the basement, so I couldn't even text any of the others. I heard the tapping again on the window right behind me. I wasn't able to see anything due to how dark it was outside. I finally had some luck when I heard Brooke knock on the bathroom door, and then say something along the lines of, "Hey, hurry up, I have to go real bad." I tried to shush her from the other side of the door without being too loud myself. Just then, the tapping then happened for a third time. I was basically crying at this point from fear. By some miracle, I think Brooke caught on a little to what was actually happening due to my quiet shush followed by the tapping on the window. I finally finished up and then jumped from the toilet and out the door, being very careful to not make any noise. I decided to leave the light on to not give away my position to whoever was out there. When I left the bathroom, I grabbed Brooke and I shushed her, then practically pulled her back down to the basement, locking the door behind me. We got back down to the basement, where I explained to Brooke and Mackenzie what had happened. They both seemed really freaked out, but luckily they both believed me. I should also mention that Brooke is an only child, so the tapping couldn't have been any siblings and her parents were out of town on a vacation, so we knew it wasn't them either. We were still freaked out, but we decided to forget about it and just continue with our night, eventually falling asleep. At some crazy off hour of the night, we were all then awoken by some pounding from somewhere upstairs. Again, I was able to keep from screaming as to not give myself away, but the other two were not. They both began screaming and hysterically crying, which gave up any hope of hiding our locations. The banging stopped, and we eventually settled down a little bit. We decided to all walk upstairs and then look outside to see if anyone was there. We got to the top of the steps and walked together to the kitchen window, then peered out. At first, we didn't see anything until we saw a dark figure of a man jump up face to face with us with just the glass window separating us. It was way too dark to get any description of the man, but we were 100% sure we all saw him. We all screamed and then booked it back downstairs, locking the door behind us. We had no idea who the man was or where he went after that. We called Brooke's parents in the morning, who came home prematurely from their vacation. We stayed down in the basement as long as we possibly could, until we had to come up to get food and use the bathroom. We have no clue what exactly happened that night, and it still really freaks us all out even to think about. Thank God we were smart enough to lock all the doors in the house that night, or who really knows what could have happened. Last weekend, I went to have a sleepover at my best friend's house. He had an older brother and a younger brother. Both of his parents were home. For some context, his parents had a security system. It obviously wasn't a good one. I had also stuck a knife in my backpack. I'm a very paranoid person, so it made me feel better to have a weapon. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to go use the bathroom, then went back to bed. About 30 minutes later, I woke up to my friend's mom then screaming. Both my friend and I then shot up at the same exact time. I grabbed my backpack and dug for the knife. I shushed my friend and then got up to lock the door. I stood at the door with my knife. I told my friend to grab his phone and call 911. My friend's bedroom was directly across from his younger brother's room. We then heard his little brother start to scream. When I came out of his room, I saw his dad and older brother beating the hell out of this man with a baseball bat. I then ran in the room and started helping them. The man had also brought a knife. Not too long after, the police arrived and they arrested the guy. They also brought in an ambulance. His little brother actually got stabbed a few times. It was crazy. My friend called me yesterday, and he told me that his little brother is out of the hospital now, and he's doing much better. His parents also thanked me profusely for my help. Ever since this happened, I've always made sure that my doors and windows are securely locked. They've already given the man a sentence. He was charged with breaking and entering and attempted murder. He was given 20 years. I'm honestly really worried that when he gets out, he's going to strike my friend's house or my house again, but I'm really hoping that doesn't happen. I'm from London, and this story took place back in August of last year. I'm 14 now, but I was 13 years old at the time, and during the summer holidays, I would always have a sleepover with my best friend because her birthday was during that month. I had been sleeping at her house for a couple of days now. The day was her birthday, and I was going to be going back home the next day, and so we decided to go out at 10 p.m., just when the sun had started to set. We want to go get some dinner at a fish and chip shop. As we were walking there, on our way, we were listening to some music on my phone. As I was waiting for her, I had looked around our surroundings. We were on a road opposite a park, only a few minutes away from the shop. I could see it from afar, but when I had then turned around to face the park, I had spotted a man who looked like he was in his mid-40s. He was sitting in a white van parked beside a children's park and just staring at me and my friend. When he realized I was staring at him, he waved at me, and he gave me this sickening grin. So I pointed him out to my friend, and at first we didn't really think too much of it. We just thought it was weird. Only a second later, he repeated the action, so we ignored him, and we just decided to carry on and get to the shop. Once we had gotten our food, we were joking about the man, calling him a weirdo, and laughing about the whole situation. Then as we were about to walk past the park, on our way back again, we started joking to each other, saying, "What if he's still there waiting for us?" Once we got into the park, our laugh soon died down, as we then realized we were correct. That same man was just sitting still, parked right there in the children's park. Once he had noticed us, he kinda just glared at us with the same creepy, sinister grin as before. We ignored him, and we just started walking back to our house. I turned around just to check if he was still staring at us, but he had already turned the engine of his van on, and had slowly started driving behind me and my friend. I alerted her of the situation almost immediately, and she started shaking, because she already kind of feared something like this would happen. I looked at my phone to see if I could call anyone, but it was only at 2%. So we then tried to act as if we didn't even notice him following us, and just carried on walking back. But then right then he sped up, so that now he was driving right beside us. He had started trying to speak to us, saying things like, "Oh, what are you guys carrying? Where are y'all going?" And saying things like that. My friend then whispered in my ear that she was going to run to the end of the road, as his car wouldn't be able to go around the corner, and she said that I should go with her. I told her that I wasn't going to run with her, and that I was going to carry on walking. I honestly had no idea what was going on in my head at that moment. I guess if it was fight or flight, she chose flight, and I chose fight. I was trying to remain calm, and think more rationally instead of panicking. So she ran and waited for me at the end of the road. Now that she had ran, the man had turned his full attention towards me, and he said that he wasn't going to hurt me, and if I could just stop for a minute, so he could get out of his car and speak to me. But obviously I wasn't falling for that. He then kept asking me questions like where did I live, how old I am, where I'm headed to, etc. I just ignored him and kept walking, not daring to look at him, and I just pretended he wasn't there. He had started to get annoyed as I wasn't answering him. So he sped up his van, and he tried to block the road, so I couldn't move past him. I was petrified. He then took off his seatbelt and went to exit his van. So as quickly as I could, I sped as fast as I could right around his vehicle and over to my friend. We then both ran and hid behind the corner. Now for whatever reason, he had parked his van in the middle of the road, I guess waiting to see where we were. He went to get out of his van, but he must have figured we were gone by that time, and he drove off after that. Once we watched him drive off, we bolted back to her house and told her mom everything that happened. She saw the panic in our eyes, so she knew we weren't lying. She asked us if we had gotten a picture of the license plate, but we hadn't. So the mom said she would go back there with us, so that we could take a picture to give to the police. As we were walking back, I couldn't believe my eyes. This man and his creepy ass then actually returned to the children's park, and he was just watching all the kids. It was so sickening. Once we had gotten a picture of the license plate, he got out of his car and started to follow us again, but now on foot. But when my friend's mom saw this, she then rushed over to us and ushered us away. When he saw we were with an adult, he slowly got back in his car and acted like nothing ever happened. We called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was long gone at that point. I honestly wish I could say that it ended there, but it didn't. Well, a few days ago, I was scrolling through the news just to see if I could find out anything involving this man, and I did. A little boy was followed home by the exact same man. He was driving the same exact car, same description, everything, and it all happened in the same exact place, right near that children's park. It makes me feel absolutely disgusting knowing that he's out there trying to still kidnap kids. It's been about 6 months since all this happened, and he hasn't been caught. We really do live in a messed up world. I hate it. This happened in Grand Prairie, Alberta, when I was around 14 to 15 years old. My mom let me have a sleepover with a friend. We'll call her Rose for privacy reasons. We had spent the whole day sharing gossip and watching really cheesy romance movies as well as comedies. Sometime during the evening, we had asked her mom if we could go for a walk over to Rose's friend's house. We'll call her Miranda. She said no at first, saying it was too late, but we negotiated, and she said if we do a load of dishes that we can go. We finished up quickly and then took off. Miranda's house was around 8 blocks away, so we took shortcuts through the alleys. Rose and I stopped by a gas station to get some snacks. We also got some bottled pop and gum. It was our turn in the line, and we put the pop and our gum on the counter. We walked out of the gas station, and we continued on our way to Miranda's house. Again, we took some shortcuts through alleys and backyards. We made it to Miranda's house, and we had a really fun time watching movies and sharing some snacks. Rose had asked Miranda's mom if we could stay for the night and then walk back tomorrow, and Rose had to call her mom to tell her she was staying over. Well, she had forgotten her phone, and she wanted to use mine. I went to grab my purse and get my phone out when I noticed it wasn't there. I told Rose that I must have left it in the basket that we used to carry the snacks. So we set off to go back to the gas station, and Miranda joined us this time. We arrived at the gas station, and I had asked the lady at the counter if she had found a purse, and she walked into the back and came back with my purse. I thanked her and gave her a tip for the help, and we started walking back to Miranda's house. That's when Rose then noticed that there was a gray truck right behind us, driving slowly up the street. We turned onto another street, and the truck turned too. It then pulled over, and two men got out. I don't really remember much more, but I do remember that we had started panicking as they got closer. Rose said to run, and we bolted across the street, and we ran through a lot of backyards and back roads. We hid in someone's backyard, and we saw two men climbing over the fence, but luckily the two men then left the backyard about 30 seconds later. We went in the opposite direction and put up our hoods so we wouldn't be recognized again, and we finally made it back to Miranda's house safely. We didn't plan on telling anyone, but Miranda's mom noticed our disturbed expressions and silence, and we later on reported the incident, but unfortunately, the men were never found. We don't really talk about it anymore. We're just really glad we escaped. I'm honestly not sure what they would have done to us if they had caught us, but I don't want to know. This happened in the mid-1980s, and I was 14 years old at the time. My friend was having a birthday party / sleepover. All 5 of us girls had to do chores before we were allowed to start the sleepover. So we went to each other's houses, and we helped each other out so we could get it all done a lot faster. Well, when we were walking to the sleepover, my friend had told us all about the Ouija board. She had to explain it to us because we were all naive, but we were all very excited to play with it. We get to the sleepover, and we all took turns asking the board questions. Then all of a sudden, I had felt a burning in my back. I started crying, and everyone got really concerned and asking what's wrong. I told them my back was burning, and when they lifted up my shirt, I had a long bloody scratch going down my back. We were all freaked out, and I said I didn't want to play anymore, and after they saw what happened to me, neither did they. My friend threw away the Ouija board almost immediately, and we never touched it again after that. What did we all learn, you might ask? Don't mess around with things you don't understand. I sure won't. To start off, I'd like to say that I'm a female, and I'm 30 years old. This happened to me when I was 14, and I'll never forget it. It was summertime, and I was visiting my cousin in Orlando, Florida. I was to stay with her the entire summer break, and occasionally go see my dad who wasn't too far away. During the stay at her place, I'd met a lot of her friends who were about 4 to 5 years older than me. One of her friends, who we'll call Denise, was really cool, and she had a few younger sisters and younger brothers who really liked to hang out with me. So one day my cousin says that we were invited by Denise for a sleepover, and I couldn't have been more excited because my aunt's house was always so hot, and to be honest, kind of a little boring. We packed a little bag and headed over to Denise's house. Before I go on, my parents had no clue where I was. I didn't even know where I was. I wasn't really familiar with the area, and I didn't pay any attention to the surroundings on the drive over. To continue, we arrive at Denise's house, and again, she had sisters and a brother who I actually found out were her half-siblings, and they lived with their mom and dad, which was Denise's stepdad. The first night there, they took us to the movies, the mall, and then when we got home, they ordered us some food for us to eat. Denise's parents were extremely friendly, so I began to trust them almost immediately. I know, stupid kid. Anyway, that night was a real blast, and we had stayed up really late, laughing all night long. The next morning we all woke up, and we then had some cereal, and went about our day, again having lots of fun, playing in the pool in the backyard, and staying up late. I had started to worry about not packing enough clothes, as I thought we would just be there for the weekend, but my cousin then told me we'd be going home the next day. When the next day came, I was all packed up and ready to go, but I was told we would be getting picked up later in the day, which was fine, as I was having a lot of fun being there. Denise's stepdad went to the store and came back with a lot of oysters and a lot of beer. Then only a few moments later, a few of his friends came by, all older men like himself, probably around the age of 40 and up. I immediately began to feel uncomfortable, but I just stayed away from them. I would occasionally walk past them, and they would all be staring at me. I was a bit on the chubby side, so I kinda had a little bit of meat on my body, and I guess they liked that. They were all standing around eating and drinking, sweating bullets. My cousin warned me to stay away from them, as they were all drunk and could potentially harm me in some way, if you know what I mean. So I did just that, again, making as little interaction as possible. I found myself outside looking for my cousin at some point, and I didn't know where she ran off to. So I went inside the house, and as I'm walking down a really long hallway towards the kid's bedroom, Denise's stepdad came out of his bedroom. I knew he was a little drunk, so I was kinda nervous. I gave a really nervous smile, and I attempted to walk past him. He kinda just stood there, blocking my way to the bedroom. I laughed nervously and tried to squirm past him, but he then grabbed both of my wrists with his hands, squeezing extremely tightly, to the point where I was frozen with fear, and I started to cry. He held my wrist there for what seemed like an eternity, and the pain got worse, and I could only think one thing. This guy was going to do something to me. Finally, I heard a voice calling out for me, and I then realized it was my cousin. I was still in such shock that I couldn't respond, but when he realized she was looking for me, he immediately let me go. I then ran out to my cousin in tears, and I asked when we were leaving that she said her mom was on the way. When she asked me why I was crying, I just told her I wanted to go home. She didn't realize how red my wrists were at the time, but I could clearly see that it was super visible. When my aunt arrived to pick us up, I walked out of the house looking for Denise's stepdad, so I wouldn't get too close to him. I caught him staring at me, not even looking away when my eyes met his. It was almost like he was still thinking of what he was going to do with me. I was sick to my stomach all over again. Thankfully, I had made it out of this situation without becoming a victim of some sort. I don't remember where Denise's mom was. I believe she was working that day. I don't know what her stepdad's intentions were, but I have a pretty good idea of what he may have been thinking. It took me years to share this story. The shock from what happened will always remain part of me. I wanted to share this because maybe all the young listeners out there will learn something from this, or maybe parents who have young kids will start being more careful of whose house they spend the night at. It may not be the worst story, but it was an absolutely horrifying experience. I really consider myself lucky. The story I'm about to tell you happened when I was 15. I very clearly remember when the first incident happened. I was laying down in my room, and I remember a random number had started calling me. I answered, even though I probably know I shouldn't have, and it was a man with a really deep voice. He knew my name, and he often said the same things over and over. I thought it was just someone messing around with me, like one of my exes or something, but the call got weirder. He just kept asking me where my at-the-time boyfriend was, and was trying to convince me that if I didn't do what he said, he would take me away for a while. I got really scared, and I hung up, and I then told my mom once he had started sending me really threatening texts. I told him I called the cops, even though I didn't, and there's one message he sent to me that I'll always remember, and it said, "Oh yeah? Well, I guess we'll see who gets to you first." After I blocked the number, nothing had happened for a while after that, and I just thought it was a prank. Then about 6 months later, I had got another call from a random number. It was the same voice and the same person asking me the same weird things, but this time he got even angrier when I refused. He started sending me pictures of me from different numbers that were clearly pulled from my Instagram. I'm not going to lie, it did scare me a bit, but I didn't want whoever this person was to get to me. It was late at night, and I heard someone racing by my house beeping their horn for a good 15 seconds straight. This is what really scared me. I called the cops, who also happened to be my cousins, and I then told my mom that I was getting harassed by this random number. Sadly to say, the cops didn't really do anything, but just told me to block the number. Well, fast forward to last summer. Me and my ex-best friend were having a sleepover at my house. At no caller ID, it started calling me. This time, however, she answered it instead of me, and it created a huge situation. I began to get chills because the next sentence they said gave me déjà vu. "We'll see who gets to you first." Whenever the cops were mentioned, they were getting really angry with us and kept saying how they only wanted me. During this time, though, they had called on a no-caller ID, so we couldn't block the number when they spam called us every time we hung up. At some point in these calls, he was trying to convince me to send nudes to him, or something really ugly would happen to my friend and I. At some point, my ex-best friend actually said she thought she knew who it was. To this day, I still don't know who that strange man was and how the hell he knew what he did. When we called the cops, though, they once again did absolutely nothing, even though this person knew where I lived. They actually broke my phone because the no-caller ID spammed my phone so much to the point where it actually turned blue and it started glitching. Ever since that experience, I don't ever answer unknown calls anymore. I think I can recall getting a couple this year, but to whoever that person was and whatever they wanted from me, I just really want you to know you're fucking disgusting. Don't call me anymore, please. I would like to remain anonymous. I would describe myself as a loner all throughout high school. I would often play video games and not really socialize much and just keep to myself. One day, my friend who I called Robert for privacy reasons told me he was having a sleepover at his house, and I agreed to join him. When Friday came, my parents drove me to his house. We had headed straight to his basement, and we played some video games until around midnight, when his mom then told us it was time for bed. I woke up at exactly 2:17 a.m. to hear a thud right above us, as if someone were stomping. I tried to wake up Robert and ask him about the footsteps, but he just told me to fuck off and he went back to bed. I tried going back to sleep, but I heard that same thud 30 minutes later, followed by heavy footsteps. I then heard the basement door slowly creak open. I decided to hide in the closet, right behind some coat hangers. After a while of waiting, I dozed off. I would say I woke up right around an hour later to then hear the sound of really heavy breathing. I looked up, and what I saw next gave me chills. Through slits in the closet door, I saw a pair of red eyes peering in right at me. My stomach felt like it was about to explode right out of my chest. I covered my mouth with both hands to stop myself from screaming. I crawled further back into the closet and hid in the darkness and just stayed there until morning. When morning came, I questioned myself about what I saw last night. Whether I was in a trance or if it was something paranormal that I witnessed, it always gives me the creeps just thinking about it. After that night, I had stopped going to Robert's house altogether, and I never told anyone. When I was in elementary school, I had a friend who we'll call Lily. Lily and I would always have playdates because, well, we only lived a few blocks away from each other. On this specific night in question, we were having a sleepover at my house, which I was really excited for. My friend Lily was super into paranormal things and at a very young age, and I would kind of just go along with it since I too thought it was kind of fun. Well, when Lily came over, we decided to go in my basement to play some board games and cards. When she then took out a camera that she had in her bag, she had then started telling me about her imaginary friend named Lucy. I obviously didn't believe her because at the time, I just didn't really believe in ghosts, but I just told her that I believed her anyways. So Lily then asked me if I wanted to take a picture with her imaginary friend Lucy. So I agreed. While Lily was setting up the camera, I sat down on the couch that was in the basement. I remember this photo she took very vividly because it really shocked me after she took it. When she then told me that Lucy was sitting right next to me, I then said back, "Okay, let's take the picture." She took the picture, and I then ran over to her to see what it looked like. While I was smiling and pretending to put my arm around this imaginary figure Lucy, I remember seeing orbs all right next to me. I didn't know what orbs were at the time, but when Lily and I went to go show my mom the picture, her stomach dropped to the floor. I saw her expression, and it frightened me a little bit. Then my mom told me that she saw the orbs. My friend Lily knew what orbs were, but I was completely clueless when it came to that, and my mom ended up telling me exactly what they were. It really freaked me out after that picture was taken, and it scared me so bad that I wasn't able to get much sleep that night. Being a young child, it was a pretty scary experience. I've been really trying to find ways to submit this story, but out of fear of being found out by the two females that originally introduced me, I finally realized that it's been 6 years since this happened, and they probably won't remember, as this was traumatic for me and just another night for them. In 2015, I was 13 and I found a lot of people attracted to me that had meant me harm, or even just a bunch of weirdos, but nonetheless, these girls stuck out. Let's name them Brittany and Renee for the sake of this story. They were sisters. Brittany was 17 and Renee was 14. I was a chubby 5 feet 3 inches strawberry blonde nerd, simply put. Brittany was a tall 5 feet 9 inches black-haired beauty, and Renee was taller at 5 feet 10 inches with blonde hair, but you could clearly tell which sibling was prettier. Renee was outgoing and just wanted to be friends with everyone, but former friends prevented that from happening with spiteful rumors, sexual harassment, stalking, and even drugging, which I didn't really listen to, as I was also a part of a few weird rumors. I really don't know what sparked Renee's initial interest to me, but I know that we bonded over the anime Attack on Titan, and well, that sparked a deep interest with me and we became friends. During this time in my early preteen years, I was really getting into horror, paranormal, and true crime. The works, you know. While my mom encouraged my exploration, she said there was a few movies that was off limits. Human Centipede, Spit on Your Grave, and Megan is Missing, just to name a few. Those movies were the ones that were completely off limit, and I needed to be 18 to watch and more mature, because my mom knew how easily triggered I was with things like rape and human abduction. Well, on August 24th, it was Renee's 15th birthday, and she invited me over for a sleepover. I went because I wanted to see what my first sleepover with someone outside of family would be like. We had a really good time, singing karaoke, drinking root beer, pretending to get drunk. Young teen fun, you know. When her dad came into the living area and said he was off to work, I noticed that Renee got kind of a smirk of mischief, before then chiming, "Okay, Dad." After he left, Brittany came into the room and began to socialize, while Renee disappeared down to her basement. Well, she then returned with the Human Centipede in hand. Fuck. I calmly explained that I can't watch that because of that stuff in the movie from what my mom said, and that I wouldn't enjoy it. The girls began to croon and plead to get me to watch it. I kept saying no, but then Brittany grabbed my wrists and then said, "Well, you won't have a choice," before giggling evilly. I was being dragged across the room to the futon couch as I pleaded to just be let go, and I'm not in the mood to watch that movie. The girls mimicked and mocked me as I cried, before then slapping cuffs over my wrists. Their mother was a police officer and had left her cuffs home conveniently. I thrashed before Brittany closed her hands over my cheeks that were already slick with tears from pain. She wasn't being gentle with my wrists. She lowly spoke in a serious tone. "You scream, Ray, and I'm cutting your tongue out." That made me shut up, and soon I was watching the movie. I won't get into the details of the movie, as I'm sure the premise of the name Human Centipede is obvious as it's a horror classic. When it was done, I was just a dissociative mess. I was finally uncuffed, and I just kept repeating how I wanted to go home. The girls just laughed at me, then went upstairs, leaving me in the dark. I reached into my bag to call my mom and dad. 30 minutes later, my dad was outside, and I grabbed my blankets and bag to leave, and I never looked back. That night, I deleted Renee's contact, and I blocked her on Facebook. I didn't bother with her sister, because I didn't have her number nor Facebook, but that Facebook page was deactivated soon after. My mom was obviously furious, about a week after when I finally told her, and she stormed into the girls' house and bitched out their mom, who then pulled the girls out of the house to scold them, before giving them laps all around the block. Apparently, their mother was a drill sergeant mother, which I guess is why they preferred their dad as opposed to their mom. About a year after the sleepover, Renee moved, because their mom was really fed up with having all these other moms bitch and yell at them for their kids' misbehavior, because it seemed like no matter what the punishment was, they just never learned. I'm 20 years old now, but that night still really haunts me, and I oftentimes find myself wondering why they did that to me. I'll never understand it. My name is Izzy, and this happened to me and my best friend, Elise. At the time of this story, we were in the 6th grade, and in my opinion, that makes this all the more disturbing. My first period class that year was language arts. To understand part of the story, you need to understand part of the layout. You walk into the room, and there's 4 clusters of desks in the shape of a circle. Each corner of the room had one. The computer board was at the front of the room. Next to that was a library corner, which had a desk cluster next to it. I sat at those desks with 4 other people. Only 2 people in my circle matter in this story. I'm no longer in touch with these people, so I'm going to be using nicknames for privacy. My friend D sat right next to me. He was a bigger person at the time, and was almost always serious. H was quiet almost always, and didn't really have many friends. He never really participated in the group, reading what we had to do. H not reading when he was supposed to made the group upset that we had to do more work, and H was getting away with doing nothing but playing games on his Chromebook. He was getting sick of H getting away with not doing anything, so he stood up, walking over to H, grabbing his Chromebook while saying, "What are you doing on this thing anyway?" As he looked at the screen, he freaked out over something the rest of us couldn't see. I thought he would show us what was on the screen, but he didn't, until I asked what it was. I remember being annoyed that he didn't show us without one of us having to ask. That feeling of annoyance quickly disappeared when he turned the screen to face the rest of us. H had several tabs open, all of which were either pictures of human bones or human organs. I know that doesn't sound all that alarming, but as kids, you should be able to imagine how that freaked us out. The images H had on his screen wasn't what made me so scared. It was the face he was making at us. H was smiling, and not like a normal smile. He was smiling like he was planning something, or maybe he was just freakishly proud that we saw what he'd been up to. It was really disgusting, and he looked so happy. I felt a chill when his eyes landed on me. I got extremely upset about that. I leaned forward, telling H, you need to do the work with the rest of us and stop being a creepy freak, which now I really regret saying. It wasn't the fact that he almost immediately stopped smiling. It was that he never stopped looking at me. I was so focused on the way H was looking at me that I barely reacted to the teacher yelling at me. She apparently heard me call H a creepy freak and decided to have a talk with the group. When we were done being lectured by our teacher, H started deleting his search history. The only thing the rest of us could do was watch him do it. None of us wanted to get in trouble again. After a few more moments of us all staring at H, we started to read the book again. Elise and I didn't have any classes together until after lunch, so while we sat down at our lunch table, I then told Elise what had happened. After we talked for a while, we decided we weren't going to let that ruin our day. We were really excited because Elise was spending the night at my house, after finding out her mom couldn't let her stay home alone, because her little brother had to get a surgery that night. So we went about our day without thinking twice about it. Before we knew it, we were finally going to my house. We got on the school bus, and we started talking about how our days were, and what we were going to do since she was spending the night. The bus eventually pulled to our stop, and we got off and started walking towards my house. When we got inside, we had started taking off our jackets and kicking off our shoes. Another piece of information is that I had a dog. We were supposed to take him outside, but that never happened. My dog was barking in his crate downstairs, but we didn't really think anything of it, considering dogs get really excited when their owners get home, and he most likely had to use the bathroom since he'd been in his crate all day. Elise had gotten her shoes off before me and started walking down the stairs, but suddenly paused, before then yelling as loud as I've ever heard her speak. "What the fuck?" She didn't move, just stood on the stairs. Since she had spoken so loudly, I freaked out, and then looked in her direction. I just barely saw something else out of my dog's crate then move, but then almost immediately move out of my field of vision. Elise was definitely in shock because she only responded back with, "Get a weapon," after I asked her multiple times, "What's wrong? What did you see?" as I too started to freak out. I listened to her, but I stupidly chose the worst makeshift weapon you could possibly choose. Somehow in my mind, I thought that a pillow would make a great weapon. Yes, a fucking pillow. Luckily, Elise was a lot smarter than I, and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife we had, and charged downstairs. I didn't know what we were looking for, because Elise didn't tell me. There wasn't a single place that we didn't check. Whatever we were looking for wasn't in the house. We were both really relieved, though, when we didn't find what freaked Elise out, but I soon figured out why she was so scared, what she then told me. I looked down there, and there's someone sitting, or maybe laying on the floor, messing with one of your dog's toys. Elise saying that made me lose any form of calm that was left in me. When my parents came home, I don't believe we told them what happened, but if we did, I don't think they'd believe us. And as if the story couldn't get any worse, the next day at school when I walked into homeroom, H walked up to me and says, "Hey you, I thought I should let you know that I really enjoy crawling around in your basement. Yeah, it's a lot of fun," and then calmly walks away. So yeah, somehow my creepy-ass classmate broke into my house and was just chilling in my basement. I don't know why or what he was really doing in my house, but I really hope he doesn't come back, because my dog isn't a scared little puppy anymore, and he'll really fuck you up if he has to. In the summer of 2019, my friends and I were having a sleepover in honor of one of our friends' 17th birthday. Rayanna had invited our friends, McKenna, Reese, Mackenzie, and more to come over to swim in her pool, drink, hang out with some boys, and sleep in her trailer, so we didn't wake up her parents. We would sleep in the trailer in her driveway. There were 4 beds, a bunk bed in the left corner, and then directly beside there was a single bed. And finally, right as you walk in, there was another bed. After having hours of fun, puke, and rally, and tons of teenage drama, we decided to head over to the trailer, so we didn't wake the neighbors or Rayanna's parents. It was about 3 a.m. when things began to settle down. About 10 minutes later, Reese had still been wide awake, and her drunk self decided to look out the window on the top of the bunk where she and I were sharing. She recalled seeing a teenage boy quickly walking on the sidewalk beside us, repeatedly looking behind himself to watch another teenage boy quickly following him. She decided to stick up for the first boy, and yelled random things to get him to stop following. The second boy, noticeably not sober, instantly heard the screams from Race and Rayanna, and it caught his attention. Scared, she stayed quiet beside me while I was trying to sleep. Well, about a minute later, Reese decided to check again, and there the guy is, right in front of the trailer, investigating the noise. He was getting really close to the door when Reese then told me, "Hey, don't freak out, but there's a guy right outside the trailer." I sat up quickly to look outside, and there he was, wandering around right beside us. I, not listening to her, announced to everyone else the quietest I could that there was a guy outside the trailer. Rayanna quickly got up and looked outside a window so she could see for herself, and then told everyone else to get underneath of us in the bottom bunk. McKenna, Rayanna, and a few other friends were huddled in the bottom bunk when Mackenzie, our smallest yet fearless friend, decided to stay outside and check the windows. The man, still not sure of where the yelling came from, was gone. We sat for a few minutes in silence, contemplating calling someone, until Mackenzie decided to look out the window of the bottom bunk. this window facing the garage. She quickly announced that he was standing right beside the window. She could only see his legs though, quickly closing the window. We sat scared once again in silence, Mackenzie still running back and forth through the windows to see where he was. At one point, he decided to walk to the middle of the street just to look at the grand view of the house. This is when we thought it was over. Everyone was getting back into their sleeping spots, discussing what had just happened, when Mackenzie decided to look out the window again. The man was now standing on the front steps of Rihanna's house. We couldn't do anything but just sit quiet and wait until the intoxicated man would leave. We didn't know what he would do if he had realized people were in the trailer. He did end up leaving after quite a while, but we all definitely took a while to fall asleep that night. In the morning, Rihanna tried to check her surveillance cameras, but they had been disconnected. We have no proof of this happening, except for the group of us who experienced it. Rihanna believes the guy came back the next night, since she heard a lot of noises from her front door while she was home alone. Moral of the story: don't scream at cracked out men when you're vulnerable in a trailer. You really have to wonder though, what would have happened if he had tried to open the door? I'm sure we could have defended ourselves, but the story could have ended a lot worse. This happened to me and my friends just last night. For some information about us, we're all females between the ages of 13 to 15. For privacy reasons, I'm going to use K for friend 1, J for friend 2, and D for friend 3. Now, you really need to know how my house is laid out. At the very back of my house, there's a pool cage, and right behind that is thick woods. Okay, so now that you know the details, I'll begin the story. I had my friend over for a sleepover. It was around 8:30 at night when my friend Kay said that we should go night swimming. And right by this time, the sun was starting to set. We all hopped in the pool. After swimming for 30 minutes, it was completely dark. We started to get a really eerie feeling coming from the woods. The picture that we created in our heads looked like it came right out of a horror movie. So there we were, 5 teens swimming at 9 at night with the view of the dark woods. Side note, in the past, we've had many weird things happen in those woods. I remember that we were playing Marco Polo when my friend Jay said that she heard something rustling in the woods. I told her to forget about it, and that it was probably just a deer or a squirrel. We went back to playing our game, when Jay said again that she swears that she saw something moving in the woods. We all get quiet, waiting to hear anything. There was nothing. All we heard was the trees swaying from the light breeze, but there was nothing. It was dead silent. After playing around in the pool for about an hour, we decided to just float around for a bit before heading inside. That's when we heard it, the light whistle coming from somewhere in the woods. Our heads shoot up, facing each other, making sure that we all heard that. There it was again though, dead silence, wondering if we would hear the same sound yet again. Then it happens, again that same whistle, but this time it sounded closer. We were terrified. We very slowly got down from the rafts we were laying on, and quietly exited the pool, while watching the woods for any movement. The whistle kept on happening, but we never saw anyone. We then ran into the house, making sure to lock the doors. We went back into my room where we got changed, and we decided to watch some movies to try and get our minds off of what just happened. After watching a movie for about 15 minutes, that's when the whistle started to start up again, but this time it was coming from my window. We all just laid there, trying not to make a sound. With the whistling came a tapping on the window. We were all still really shaken up from what happened earlier. Whatever it was seemed like it was following us wherever we went. That's when I told D to call 911. While D was on the phone with the 911 operator, the tapping then turned into a harsh bang. All we could do was just lay there in fear until the police came. It honestly felt like hours waiting for the police to arrive, but in reality only took about 5 minutes. When we finally heard sirens, everything went quiet. There was no yelling from the police, no whistling, or any kind of tapping. It was like nothing ever happened, and I went dead silent. All the police found was a kitchen knife right beside the window. None of us ended up getting any sleep that night. We were too terrified. So whoever thought it would be funny to scare a bunch of teenage girls trying to have a fun sleepover, fuck you. For starters, let me open this by positioning a trigger warning for the story I'm about to relay. The following recounts heavy subject matters, such as child-on-child sexual assault, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. Please tread lightly. My name is Zim. I'm a 19-year-old trans man, and I'm bipolar and autistic. The story is one that has deeply traumatized me, but I've made the steps necessary in the past few months to start getting the help that I need. Keep in mind, this is a heavily condensed version of these events. Anyways, the story starts at the ripe age of 12 years old, in the 7th grade, with a friend introducing me to a friend of theirs. Let's call this person G. She was a grade younger than me, despite us being the same age, and we began to grow super close. We did everything together, and it felt really nice to be at the center of someone's attention. It consisted of the type of things you would expect for the first few months. Goofy preteen shit, but there was always this underlying easiness that I felt around her. She was very touchy and controlling over me, in a way that I desperately tried to brush off as being her love language. She didn't seem to give much a shit about anyone else in our friend group, and often acted cold and bitter towards them whenever they would try to talk to me. Even the friend that introduced me to her. By the time 8th grade rolled around, she started asking very strange favors of me. We were both autistic and very much into fandom culture and role-playing, and pretty much anything I was into at the time, she would fixate on as well. The strange requests started at the lunch table, with a hand caressing and squeezing my thigh, followed by her asking to roleplay. I was always very hesitant to do so, but she always found a way to coerce me into it. As you can expect, these roleplays weren't roleplays at all, but in fact a ploy to straight-up molest me. She would force herself on me, touching my chest, kissing my neck, and sitting on my lap. All of this done in a middle school cafeteria. This happened frequently, and always ended with her playing it off like everything was normal and okay, or blaming it on her autism. Something that deeply upset me. I became used to it though. I started to tolerate the abuse because I liked the attention she was giving me. I didn't want to lose her, but I didn't like when she was angry either. Cut to around a month or two after the abuse began. G was turning 13 years old, and she was having a slumber party/pool party at a hotel. We all met at her house before taking a car there. I of course sat next to her, a hand on my thigh the whole time. Eventually we arrived, and we had checked into the hotel room to settle down a bit before heading to the pool. After a while, everyone decided to start getting into their bathing suits, and all was normal, until G asked me to come with her into one of the rooms. She shut the door behind her and smirked, asking me if I wanted to come change with her in the bathroom. I reluctantly agreed, visibly uncomfortable. She was my best friend after all, and my child brain thought it would be funny, not grasping the severity of what was happening. We both shuffled into the bathroom, with our bathing suits in hand, my heart palpitating. I faced away from her, hit with a sudden wave of uneasiness. I pulled my suit up, paying careful mind to fix the creases, and spun around, only to be met with her fully exposed body. A smile still plastered on her face. "What are you doing?" I asked, completely bewildered. "What?" "I thought it would be funny," she said, before laughing. I shuffled out of the bathroom, my heart pounding out of my chest. I sat on the bed outside, waiting for her to come out, all the while trying and failing to process what had just happened to me. Eventually she came out, and asked if I was ready to head to the pool, acting as if nothing was wrong. We made our way down with the others, my mind swirling with thoughts. The rest of the sleepover was a blur. My brain, not yet mature enough to unpack what had just happened to me, began to act recklessly, running down hallways, banging on doors, and screams singing at the top of my lungs most of the night. I remember getting scolded for it, and not caring in the slightest. Nothing was real that night. Eventually it was time to go home, and the sleepover from hell was over. But this was all just the beginning. That Monday, I came into lunch and sat down, smiling at G, who was already seated. She smirked, and placed a hand on my hand. "Can I tell you something?" She slurred. Sure, what's up?" I asked. She bit her lip, as if contemplating what she was about to say, and what she said next shook me to my core. "I want to have sex with you." I recoiled, staring at her. "What?" "I really like you," she said. I like you too," I said, completely and utterly confused. She then proceeded to explain to me in explicit detail on what she wanted to do to me, and how she would do it, essentially describing rape. I wasn't in a good place during this time. I was confused and scared, never really knowing what she was going to do or say next. I began to grow confused over my own feelings. Maybe I liked her too. After all, I did like the attention she was giving me, but the touching and whispers never felt good. The verbal and sexual abuse persisted, with her getting bolder each time it happened. She would say and do things to keep me in line, like saying that her mother didn't like me, and that we couldn't hang outside of school because of what I did at her party. All of this was done to make me feel bad. She would break me down, and make it seem like I was the bad guy in the relationship, and that it was my fault that she was touching me. She would constantly call me, and grow furious if I dared to hang up. She would say things about my body, things number 13-year-old should ever be hearing from another 13-year-old. I desperately wanted out. In June of that year, my friend group started planning a trip to the drive-in theater for one of our friends who was moving in a month. It seemed like a fun idea, and I was super excited. Ice Age Collision Course and that shitty Ghostbusters remake were playing, and it was a fun night for the most part. G was lying next to me in the dark. I made it clear that I needed space, and she seemed to listen at first. I kept my eyes fixed on the movie, as I felt her arms and legs coil around me, her breath tickling my neck. I can never forget that part. The way it sent shivers down my spine. How completely and utterly terrified I felt in that moment. She pushed herself onto me, as if trying to crawl on top of me, and I pushed her away. I couldn't exactly tell what her face looked like in the dark, but I could tell she was mad. "What's your problem?" she growled. I said nothing, and walked away to join my friends in the trunk. I remember quietly crying in the car ride home. After that night, I started planning my escape. Like I stated earlier, we were a grade apart, and I had just graduated 8th grade. I actually met someone in the same year as me about a month earlier, who I shared a mutual fixation with. We'll call this person N. Me and North grew close pretty quickly due to our shared interests, and she was nothing but kind to me. It really helped me realize just how bad of a situation I was in. Soon enough, 9th grade rolled around, and I decided I was going to ghost G after she invited me to her 14th birthday party. She picked up on this very quickly and angrily questioned me on it. I ended up sending her a long, winding response about how awful of a human being she was, and how I never wanted to speak to her again. She responded by calling me multiple times, threatening to come to my house and hurt me, and leaving infuriated voicemails, where she called me things such as whore and slut. I blocked her number, and I deleted all of her messages in a fit of rage, something I deeply regret doing now. I was a child that didn't understand the concept of receipts. Despite all of my hatred towards her, I remember feeling guilty after it all. Abusers have a tendency to make you feel that way, and I was suffering from pretty severe PTSD on top of it at this point. High school felt like a blur for me. G was still in my middle school friend group for a short while after, so I did still have to interact with her. Those times were not pleasant, and she would always try to cause a scene. Eventually, though, everyone distanced themselves from her, and I developed a bit of a new friend group within, along with some of my middle school friends. Honestly, though, I don't feel I ever got a happy ending, and that's the harsh reality of it all. I have to live with what she did to me for the rest of my life, things that I blocked out for years because it was just too painful to process. I feel as if I'm finally healing now, though, and it feels good to share this experience. Children need to be more educated on the topic of sexual abuse. I sadly didn't have that luxury. For a while, I had wondered who hurt her when she was younger to make her act that way towards me, but quite frankly, I don't care anymore. She deeply hurt me, and she doesn't deserve any sympathy from me. For some context, this situation occurred when I was around 11 years old. I'm 16 years old now, so this was at least 5 years ago now. I live in England, so the school system is a little different to that of America. The school years begin in primary school, from year 1 to year 6, graduating at 10, before beginning secondary at age 11. Now this was my first year of secondary, being in year 7. I had a small group of friends, consisting of 4 other girls and 1 boy. Now, one of the girls' birthdays were approaching just a few months into the school year. Let's call her Jasmine. Jasmine had lived in a rather large house, with a smaller house across the garden that was rather spacious, with 1 room and a bathroom directly connected to it. She invited me and the other 3 girls to a sleepover at this place. Of course, we had all agreed with enthusiasm, considering that it was our first official sleepover of our preteen years. Arriving around 8 p.m. to her place, we all eagerly set up our blankets, stuffed animals, and such upon the sofa beds in the smaller garden house, as Jasmine then prepared snacks and drinks for our sleepover, along with the movie options on discs for the TV that was hooked up to the wall. It was a very fun night, watching movies and playing silly sleepover games, until it eventually reached midnight, or somewhere about then. And that's when Jasmine had a great idea. You see, I've always been really into horror-based things, ghost stories, legends, etc. So when she suggested we play the age-old game Bloody Mary, I jumped at the idea. The other 3 girls thought it would be a fun idea too, and so we switched on the television and set up the bathroom in accordance with the ritual instructions from Google. Jasmine had gone first, before coming back with nothing, simply giggling and shoving myself in after. Now, despite my enjoyment of horror like this, I also have a pretty severe anxiety disorder. So, when the door closed, and I remained alone in the dark, dimly lit bathroom, facing only the mirror, I was petrified something may happen. But I knew that the others had their ears pressed to the door to ensure that I stuck to the game's rules, and I didn't want to disappoint. So of course, I followed the rules and began chanting. Almost as expected, nothing happened, and I left the bathroom with a mix of disappointment and relief. As the other girls continued the game, I sat myself down in my sofa bed, taking my phone from my pajamas. I had been a pretty avid user of a popular app at the time, used for communities and fandoms, but if you ever had experiences with this app at my age, you'd know all too well how dangerous and toxic the environment created by the app was. I was messaging one of my friends in one of the communities, out of boredom, as the game wasn't all that interesting. Well, my friend seemed to go offline abruptly, so considering our similar time zones, I had assumed she was asleep, and I switched off my phone and got comfortable in my place. The girls had finished the game, a good deal disappointed, as nothing had happened at all. Turning on the television, another few hours passed with all of us wide awake, giggling, and having forgotten entirely about the game. That was when I received a notification on the app. Now, the app didn't exactly have any security measures that prevented random people that you had unfriended from DMing you. So when I was messaged by this strange account with an odd-looking profile picture, I sort of passed it off as a bot, which were really notorious on it at the time. I just tapped the chat, expecting to see some weird dating app advertisement, but what I did see was something much, much darker. I can't entirely recall what it wrote, but it was something in strange, distorted text, the letters almost falling out of the text bubble. It was clearly just some glitchy font, possibly to evade spam bans, but the message, it made my blood run cold. It was a chanting message, something almost akin to a cultist message, praising an oddly named being, and claiming they were close by to me behind the door. They repeated this, the message long, as it was praising this strange name, and claiming they were coming over and over again. I had sort of anxiously laughed it off, and I showed it to my friend. Let's call her Amy. Amy didn't seem to have the same reaction, being outwardly shocked, showing her other friends. We all no longer found it very funny. We were trying to calm each other down, rationalizing it. Perhaps it was just some edgy fuck trying to creep us out, but then the door creaked and knocked. The door to the smaller house. Now, there weren't exactly any walls on the front of the small house. Instead, however, there were windows, including the door, but we could see nothing but darkness, especially in contrast with the illumination of the television. Another message then came through. We're here. And then it was followed by even more praising to the being. Surely this couldn't have been happening. This couldn't be real. One of them was messing with us, surely. Amy began to sob, and I did too. We decided to risk it all, leaping out of the garden house, and running blindly to the back door of the larger one, crying and trembling, and sprinting to the living room. We hid out there for a while, leaving the light on as we huddled for about half an hour. I blocked the creep, closed the app, and my phone. Nothing else seemed to happen after this. To this day, I'm not entirely sure if it was just some sicko trying to mess with us, or if we really were actually in danger. For some odd reason, we never told anyone, though, being the children we were, I guess. Please be careful on social media. Don't ever give away any information that could be personal or put you in danger. And don't trust anyone online that you've never actually met. This happened in May of 2020, when I was 14 years old. My best friend at the time, who we'll call Ella, was spending the night with me. The night was going smoothly, until Ella suggested to me that we go to the nearest Shell station to go get some snacks and slushies. I was hesitant at first, because it was around 11 p.m. at that point, and my area is a hot spot for human trafficking. I pushed my paranoia to the side and agreed to go anyway. The Shell was about a half-mile away, so it didn't take us long to get there. We went around the store looking for snacks that we could get, when I saw an older lady standing in the middle of the chip aisle. She wasn't looking at the variety of chips that they had, but she was just staring at me. I walked into the aisle because I wanted a bag of sour cream and onion chips. She was in the way of the chips, so I asked her, "Excuse me, ma'am, but can you scoot over?" She said yes, and then moved so I could get the chips. I met up with Ella, so that we could get in line to pay for our stuff. While the guy was scanning our stuff, I turned around and saw that same woman from earlier. She didn't have anything in her hands, so I thought maybe she was getting cigarettes. Once we paid, we proceeded back to my house. On the way back, we saw this Toyota Camry trailing behind us. When they didn't turn at an intersection, we started to get suspicious. We stopped, and the car next to us also stopped. Ella knocked on the passenger window because she was the closest to the road. The window rolled down, and guess who was in the seat? Yup, the woman from the gas station. Why is she in this car that's been following us? I thought in my head. Once the window rolled all the way down, she then did something completely unexpected. She grabbed Ella's arm and tried to pull her in the car. I immediately grabbed her other arm and got her loose. We ran like hell all the way back to my house as the car sped after us. I'm not a very athletic person, but I was running faster than I ever had before in my life. After about a minute of running, we made it back to my house and ran inside. This was really stupid looking back now. We should have went to one of my neighbors' houses and asked for help. Anyway, we get into the house and lock the door immediately. Surprisingly, she or whoever she was with didn't start banging on the door. We were still so scared that we went into my closet and just stayed in there for the rest of the night. We just stayed awake because we were so scared. Nothing else ended up happening, which I'm also really grateful for. I ended up dropping Ella in October 2021, and I haven't talked to her since, but I know that she was really freaked out as well. I don't go to that gas station anymore unless I'm with my mom and she has to get gas there. I really hate to think what they would have done to us if they had actually managed to kidnap us. It literally makes me sick. I'm Lucy. When I was 12 years old and in 6th grade, I had not one, but 3 best friends that I used to hang out with all the time, and we loved to have sleepovers. We had them all the time, but we always took turns having houses. This was super easy because we lived in the same neighborhood. And just like us, our moms also knew each other, went to school together, and used to be good friends. This time, we had planned to have a sleepover at my friend Catherine's house. Catherine was the youngest of 4 siblings. She had 2 older sisters and an older brother. Kat's siblings were very kind and nice, and whenever we went to sleepovers at their house, they usually stayed in their rooms and only went out to eat, so we never felt like we were inconveniencing them in any way. But on this occasion, a couple of their cousins were also staying at their house. Kat had an excellent relationship with her siblings. Her brother would occasionally let us play PS4, while her sisters were always talking about boys and high school gossip. As for her cousin, this one was in 8th grade and was about the same age as one of the older catering sisters, so this one was staying in her room. As for the cousin, this was a boy who was a junior in high school and as expected was staying with Kat's brother in his room. Her cousin was very nice, although she seemed a bit shy. The boy, on the other hand, was someone a bit creepy. He was definitely much more outgoing than his sister, but something about his mannerisms was somewhat disturbing, especially when he smiled, because he did it in a strange way. It seemed more like he was smiling to himself than to you. He had dirty black, greasy, stringy, shoulder-length hair and was quite thin. In the short time of interaction I had with him, I could tell that Kat actually looked uncomfortable around him. Later, when we were all in Kat's room, Kat told us that she had met her cousins recently. This because her mother and aunt had not spoken to each other for many years because they had been fighting, but they had recently made peace and reconnected. So they both thought it would be a good idea if the aunt and her children came to visit, and they were planning to stay for a week. Kat and I had a lot of trust, so I asked her what she thought of her cousins, and she told me that she thought her cousin was very nice, but that she thought her cousin was weird from the first moment she saw him. My friend told me that he had tried to hang out with her instead of her brother, that he did strange things like going to her room and going through her toys and books to try to talk to her. He would also do things that were uncomfortable for her, like stroking her cheeks and her hair in a kind of strange way, something that made her feel weird. So she usually walked away from him, and whenever she did, he had this really cold look in his eyes. Catherine would say that he would stare at her for a few seconds before smiling that creepy smile. We all agreed that he was a really strange boy, but at that age we didn't have the maturity or the malice to think that behind these gestures there could be malicious intentions, so we didn't make a big deal of it and went on to talk about other things, the typical things that 6th graders talk about. In the end, we ended up watching a movie, and before going to bed, we took turns going to the bathroom down the hall, which Catherine shared with one of her sisters, the older one, since the middle one had her own bathroom in the room. We all asked for our turn to brush our teeth, and since I really didn't care, I was the last one to go there. When Eucharist, another one of my friends, came back and told me she was done, I was relieved, because I was really anxious and tired, and I just wanted to brush my teeth so I could get into bed and gossip with my friends until we fell asleep. I walked down the hall again and opened the bathroom door. I was so distracted at the time, I didn't notice Kat's cousin in the bathroom until I turned on the light and saw him sitting there on the toilet. I quickly excused myself and closed the door. At that point, I just wanted to leave and run back to the room with my friends, as this really gave me a very strange feeling. I mean, he was locked in the bathroom with the light off, not doing anything, because while I was sitting on the toilet, he was with all his clothes on. And if that wasn't weird, I don't know what would be. But before I could leave, he opened the door, smiled at me, and told me to go ahead. I really didn't mind brushing my teeth at that moment, but I didn't want to run off and be rude to him, so I thanked him and went into the bathroom, closing the door immediately behind me. I quickly brushed my teeth and did my business, and it's from here that things get really creepy for me. I opened the door, and to my surprise he was still there, waiting with a smile on his face and blocking the door. Feeling very uncomfortable, I asked him for permission to let me out. "Shall I walk you to your room?" he asked. I didn't even know what to say, and he took my silence as a yes, I guess, because before I knew it, he grabbed my right hand and was walking with me back to Kat's room. His hands were very warm and sweaty, even though he didn't look like he was sweating, and it wasn't remotely hot. As I walked hand in hand with her towards my friend's room, I felt my body go numb, and I could hear my own breathing. I honestly felt like I was going to pass out. I swear that hallway had never felt so long. When I finally got there, Kat's room that is, he let go of my hand and said goodnight, walking back to the room he was staying in, the one we passed through before we got to Catherine's room. When I walked in, I guess the look on my face was such that all my friends came up to me and asked me what had happened to me. And after a few seconds of being a little shocked, I told them what happened, and they all agreed that it was super weird. Kat said she would talk to her mom in the morning, and I hoped it would end there. But unfortunately, this was just the beginning of a scary night. Our parents had set us a very clear rule for sleepovers, and that is that you are not allowed to lock the doors during sleepovers. That was usually okay, but not in this case. I had to have been asleep for a few hours when suddenly, I woke up to Kat shaking me frantically. Apparently she had been awake for quite a while, and since I was sleeping next to her, I was the first one she ran to and told her what was going on. My friend, in a shaky, cracked voice, told me that her cousin had already opened the bedroom door twice, and on both occasions, he just stared at us with his characteristic sinister smile for a couple of minutes, and then closed the door slowly and quietly. She was awake, but she pretended to be asleep to watch what I was doing. I really freaked out when I heard this. He was just watching us sleep, and that was creepy. I was sleeping on the floor at the time, but I agreed to crawl into bed with her and wait to see if her stranger and cousin would come back. We didn't have to wait at all, as it wasn't long before we heard the door open. We both froze in bed and stared at the door. The lamp in the hallway was out, and the only source of light in that room was the reflection of the moon streaming through the window. But even so, we could see the silhouette of someone's head peeking through the door. We could feel his eyes on us, and just like Kat said, he was just staring at us in the dark, and he stayed that way for a while. For a few seconds, we were trying not to move so he wouldn't know we were awake, but at one point, he let out air through his nose like he was trying not to laugh. Then he whispered something, and after that he just closed the door. Catherine and I both felt terrified. I turned to look at my friend, and she looked like she was about to cry. She clung to me, and we hugged and waited until she came back. However, she didn't come back. I guess she decided not to come back as she realized we weren't asleep, and who knows what her intentions would be that night. After waiting for a few hours, I fell asleep, and the next morning my mom came to pick me up quite early, and I was glad that Catherine's creepy cousin was still asleep by that time. 2 days later on Monday, I saw Kat at school. I asked her what happened when I left, and she told me her mom was very worried, and I assured her that I would talk to her aunt. I guess she also told my mom what happened to me, because she asked me about it later and was curious to know what I would tell her. I finally told her what happened, and from then on she made sure Catherine's cousins weren't around, before allowing me to sleep over at her house again. But she didn't have to worry, because they never came to visit again after that. My name is Arthur, and I am currently 20 years old, but when I was 13 years old, and in my first year of high school, I had a classmate named Edgar, who invited me one weekend for a sleepover at his house. This was a little unexpected, because I didn't know Edgar very well. We had talked a couple of times before, but we weren't close friends, since we were just starting the school year, and we were practically all new, so we hadn't really spent much time together. I told him I wasn't sure, but he talked me into it, so I agreed and asked my mom when I got home, and she gave me permission, so he took me to his house after school. When I arrived at his house, the first thing I noticed was that it was very big and nice. It had a beautiful garden, and you could see a small forest in the back. I was still quite surprised that he invited me over, but I thought it would be nice to make a new friend, and he seemed to be a nice guy. Edgar showed me inside his house, which was very interesting. He had a big living room with a huge TV and lots of cool video games, something that immediately appealed to me because I love video games. When I told him this, he immediately invited me over for a game. We played Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros. As I started to interact with Edgar, I also started to notice some peculiarities, i.e. he had a peculiar way of talking and moving, and his room was full of all kinds of unusual things like comic books and action figures from different eras. He also had a weird demeanor. Sometimes he seemed lost in his own world. He laughed to himself sometimes, and I even think at one point I caught him talking to himself. I couldn't quite explain why, but I felt I didn't get along with him. Then it was time for bed. I crawled into my sleeping bag on the floor of his room, which seemed to be a fairly large room for a child. It took me a long time to fall asleep, but I eventually managed it. However, a few hours later, I woke up feeling very hot and almost suffocated. I was sweating, and that's when I noticed that my sleeping bag was completely closed, and there were 2 thick blankets covering me up to my head. I immediately pulled everything off me, and instantly started to feel much cooler. I looked around and knew I definitely didn't put that extra blanket on myself. I thought maybe Edgar did, so I turned to where he was thinking he was asleep, but I realized he was wide awake. So I asked him why he put the blanket on my head, but he said he didn't do it. I knew he was lying. I mean, it was obvious it was just me and him in that room, but when I accused him again, he got mad at me. His face turned tomato red, and he started yelling at me. I must confess that I felt a bit scared as his reaction was quite aggressive, so I decided to drop the matter, go back to bed, and spend the rest of the night. It took me a while, but I was finally able to go back to sleep. However, when I woke up, it was already morning. I looked around the room expecting to see Edgar, but he wasn't there. I thought maybe he had gone to the bathroom or something, so I waited for a few minutes, but then I really wanted to pee, so I tried to leave the room to go to the bathroom, but when I tried to open the door, it wouldn't open. It looked like it was locked from the outside. That was it. Now I was really mad at Edgar for the way he was treating me. I called my mom on the phone and asked her to come pick me up. I didn't have a good time in that house at all. He was being a complete jerk. My mom said she would come and pick me up, which made me feel relieved, but I was still locked in and had to pee. So I knocked several more times on the door and even yelled his name once, but still no answer. Edgar's house was quite large, so I thought I was in no immediate danger, but the whole thing made me very angry and frustrated me too much. I swear for a moment the thought crossed my mind to pee on his bed in revenge, but first of all I am decent, so I didn't do it, even though I felt trapped and very upset with Edgar. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Edgar's mom opened the door to her room and looked a little surprised to see me, then said in a slightly annoyed tone that my mom was here to pick me up. I left the room immediately and left without seeing Edgar. I didn't even say goodbye to his mom. I know that was a little rude of me, but I was just so angry at that point, so I just got in my mom's car and took off for home. I was so happy to go home and put that whole horrible experience behind me, and I thought I would, but I was wrong. It was Sunday, so I spent the rest of the day relaxing at home and playing video games, but later that night, I was in my room playing games, just like I said I would, when my mom called me saying that one of my friends was in the driveway. I came out and saw Edgar standing at the front door. His expression was tense, like he was too upset, and his eyes looked like they would shoot fire at any moment. I approached him, and he almost snarled at me as to why I left his house so early, and without even saying goodbye to him. This made me angry, and I told him that if he didn't remember, he had tried to smother me with blankets, and then locked me in his room and disappeared. The very cynical guy denied everything, and accused me of being a bad friend and rude. I shrugged and slammed the door in his face, then went back inside and started playing video games again. But about 15 minutes later, I suddenly heard a loud sound coming from my window, and a horrible thump on the right side of my head. The pain was so excruciating that I started screaming, and threw myself on the floor. I looked around, and there was glass scattered everywhere, and near my chair was a rock the size of a fist. My parents rushed into my room when they heard the sound of the window followed by my screams. Then as my mother rushed to help me in desperation, my father looked out the window and caught a glimpse of Edgar running down the street. My parents immediately took me to the hospital and called Edgar's parents. Fortunately, he had no skull fracture, but he did have a large open wound that required 10 stitches and several antibiotics and painkillers. But most of all, it was very painful. When my mother got through to Edgar's mother, I could hear them arguing for a while before hanging up. I'm not sure what happened to Edgar after that, but I never saw him again at school. Did you ever feel trapped in a nightmare that seemed to have no end? This all started as an innocent slumber party, with laughter, games and jokes between friends, until from one moment to the next, everything changed, and a night that was supposed to be pure fun quickly turned into a true horror story, and all because of an innocent prank. I have always loved sleepovers. The thrill of spending the night away from home sharing secrets and laughter with my closest friends is just so rewarding. My name is Andrea, and I was 15 years old at the time. That night I met up with 5 friends, all schoolmates, at the home of one of them. We all arrived around 7 p.m., carrying our backpacks full of pajamas, candy, and board games. My friend's house was huge, and her parents wouldn't arrive until the next day, so everything was perfect. It would be just the 5 of us having fun and having a good time all night, with no parents to restrict us from anything. But there was one in particular, Tanya, the landlady, who always made me feel uncomfortable. She had a bad habit of making nasty jokes about my appearance and saying things that made me feel bad or look ridiculous in front of the others. Don't get me wrong, among friends we always used to make jokes and laugh a little at each other, something like a kind of healthy bullying, but in Tanya's case things felt a little more intense. I felt that she wanted to annoy me seriously in a way. I never knew how to react to her catty comments, so I usually ended up laughing nervously and changed the subject very quickly, so as not to make a bad scene. Once we all arrived, we kicked off the night with typical girl-on-girl sleepover activities. We talked about the guys at school, got our hair done, practiced the latest makeup trends, one of my favorite activities when I'm at girls' sleepovers, and also bought a bunch of junk food to watch a movie. But before that, someone suggested that we play chase in the house, something we all thought was a fantastic idea. Then I was completely unaware that this seemingly harmless suggestion would trigger one of the scariest nights of my life, one of those real and scary horror stories you never forget. For quite a while, we ran around the house laughing and screaming, hiding behind furniture and in closets. It was too funny. At first it was hilarious, 6 girls running all over the house, chasing each other and laughing their heads off. What could go wrong? However, I gradually realized that Tanya was concentrating solely on chasing me, and her advances became more and more aggressive, until it reached a point where she caught up with me and threw me to the floor with too much force. It was unnecessary and excessive, and she hit me quite hard. I stood there breathless for a moment, feeling the weight of her body on mine. Then she whispered in my ear something like, "That's what's wrong with you, fatso, you don't run fast." This made me feel uncomfortable, obviously, because although she said it in a teasing tone, almost as a joke, you could feel the bad intention behind these words. This was something my friends noticed, and they could feel the change in atmosphere. The carefree laughter turned into a tense silence. I tried to get up, but he kept me pinned to the ground, so I said, "Enough is enough," trying to keep my voice steady despite my growing fear. It was then that the others decided to step in and teach her a lesson. In a quick and coordinated action, they all pulled her off me and managed to immobilize her, although it was quite difficult, as she had a lot of strength and was struggling frantically. We managed to tie a rope, or rather improvised ropes around her hands and legs. It took us almost 20 minutes to restrain her, and by that time, we were all almost out of breath. At that instant, we all stepped back, as we watched her bound hand and foot on the living room floor. The atmosphere was really weird, because my friends were as angry as I was at her behavior towards me, but at the same time we knew it had all gone too far. However, while she was screaming like crazy for us to untie her, one of my friends told her that she was going to stay that way for a long time, for being aggressive and a bad friend. I didn't know if I fully agreed. At first it was a kind of joke, but I found it a bit disturbing to see Tanya tied up there, although finally the girls went along with it, and agreed that it was a kind of punishment for her bad behavior towards me. After the incident, we turned on the TV and started watching a reality show. At first we were very attentive to what Tanya was doing, and looked in her direction constantly, as after the girls made it clear to her that they would not untie her until she recanted and apologized to me, she got angry and stopped talking to us. However, at one point when we were completely distracted watching the TV show, we heard Tanya's voice coming from the kitchen, and as we turned around, we realized that she was not where we left her. She was now untied and standing in the kitchen doorway, with an almost devilishly angry expression on her face and holding a huge knife in her right hand. At that moment we all opened our eyes wide, and then we heard her say loudly and with great fury, "Now you're going to regret it, bitches." At the same time, she ran out with the knife held high in our direction. Panic took over us instantly, and without thinking twice we all ran in different directions. 3 of the girls managed to get into one of the rooms, locking the door behind them, while I, in my desperation, ran to where I was in the upstairs bathroom. I barely closed the door when I heard the strong steps of Tanya going up the stairs and yelling at us to get out and try to tie her up again. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. I locked the door and curled up against it. Then I heard Tanya banging very loudly on the door of the room where my friends were locked. She seemed to be kicking it and hitting it also with the hilt of the knife, because you could hear the sound of the metal against the wood. Meanwhile, the girls were screaming on the other side. They were asking Tanya to stop, that she was behaving like a psychopath, but she kept yelling at them, insulting them, repeating over and over again that she would kill them all, while she kept hitting the door in a very scary way. Tanya started screaming my name and threatening me, but she was doing it while she was banging on the door of the room where my friends were, which made me think that she probably thought I was there too. But it didn't take her long to realize that I was not in the room, although I didn't hear the girls say anything to her. It is possible that by not hearing my voice, she realized that I was not there. It was then when I started to hear her footsteps again down the hallway. She was calling out to me, telling me not to be a coward and to come out from where I was, as she seemed to be going through room by room. However, it didn't take her long to realize where I really was, so she walked over to the bathroom door where I lay sitting on the floor and in a complete state of panic. "Hey, Amy." Now her voice sounded deceptively sweet. "Why are you hiding? Let's play some more." I didn't respond. Silent tears streamed down my face as I prayed for this nightmare to end. At one point I tried to talk some sense into her. I asked her to calm down and told her that she was acting insane and had over-exaggerated the situation. I also told her that if anyone got hurt, she would be in big trouble, so she should put the knife away instead and cut the crap. For a minute I thought she would reflect on how over the top she was being, and that her behavior was truly out of control. But instead, she started banging on the door again, this time with much more force and more anger. It's as if what I told her had enraged her even more, to the point of irrationality. Tanya was hitting the door so hard I was sure that at some point she would break it down. This while she was insulting me and saying all kinds of rude things to me, and also repeating that she would kill me. She was completely out of her mind, and began to say that she would stick the knife in me until it was blunt, and that she wouldn't care if she got life imprisonment as long as she could eliminate me from this world. She also repeated over and over again the phrase, "I'll finish you, you fat bitch." I must tell you that I had never felt so much panic in my life. I was absolutely terrified because, judging by her behavior, it was clear that she was not right in the head. I was sure that Tanya was suffering from some kind of mental illness that my friends and I had no knowledge of. I don't know how long I remained huddled, now against the wall, trembling with fear and listening to Tanya's threats. It was without a doubt the most intense experience of terror I have ever gone through in my life. The hours dragged on, as I remained inside that small bathroom. The sound of knocking on the door alternated with periods of eerie silence. My mind raced, trying to figure out how a simple sleepover had turned into one of those horror stories we usually only hear about in the scary stories we usually see on the internet. This was absolutely surreal. At one point I must have fallen asleep, and when I woke up I could see through the small bathroom window how the darkness of the night slowly gave way to the light of dawn. Everything was silent at that moment, and for an instant, I thought that everything that had happened that night had been a mere nightmare, and perhaps I would have believed it if I had found myself asleep in my sleeping bag, or in bed curled up with one of my friends. But I was still in the bathroom, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, evidence that it had all been real. Sometime during the early morning hours, I heard muffled voices from downstairs. It was the other girls whispering to each other, probably as scared as I was. I wanted to scream for help, but the fear of attracting attention kept me silent, exhausted, and terrified. Finally, I lay there, and I must have been so exhausted that I fell asleep again. But this time my sleep was restless, and I had nightmares of Tanya bursting into the bathroom and stabbing me to death. I woke up startled, and with my heart racing, only to realize once again that I was still locked up, but safe. Finally I heard the sound of cars coming to a stop with adult voices. At that moment a wave of relief washed over me from head to toe, It was such a wonderful feeling I can't even describe it. My friend's parents had finally arrived to pick up their daughters, having no idea of the horror we had endured all night. And the worst part was that by the time of the incident, our cell phones were lying in a drawer in the living room, as we had agreed to leave them turned off, so we wouldn't be interrupted while watching our favorite reality show. So we couldn't call them or ask for help in any way either. Still scared and feeling my legs very numb, I opened the bathroom door and went downstairs, and there I found a totally surreal scene. There was Tanya, sitting quietly on the couch chatting with her mother as if nothing had happened. The other girls were pale and silent, exchanging nervous glances with each other and with me. As absurd as it may seem, no one spoke of the incident in front of Tanya's parents. We just gathered our things in silence and left each of us carrying the weight of that terrible night. A night when the sleepover had turned into a real horror story. Although this seems very silly, the truth is that we never told what happened to our parents, or anyone. We decided to keep the secret, as we believed that if we told our parents they would never want to let us go to a sleepover again. And the truth is that this was something we loved to do, we just never did it with Tanya again. From that day on, we never talked to her again, and she never wanted to talk to us either, so we just ignored each other when we were in class. But beyond the terrifying experience, I learned a great lesson that day, and that is that the people we think we know may turn out to be completely different from what we think they are. This happened to me in 2005 when I was in 5th grade. At the time I was living in western Montana, and I was sharing a room with my sister, who was in 2nd grade at the time, but instead of having 2 single beds, we had a king-size bed that we shared. To better understand the story, I'll describe more, or less, what my house was like. Our room overlooked the backyard, but it was a basement room, so basically, if you stood in front of the window, your eyes were at the level of the floor of the backyard. Up and to the left, above my window, you could see our terrace, which overlooked our kitchen. A little confusing, I know, but just to give you an idea. That particular night a cousin had stayed over with us, for a sleepover. We played video games, ate chips, and watched a movie, all cliché. Our cousin was in bed with us, and as we were falling asleep around 1 a.m., he woke us up to show us that there was a deer on our deck. Immediately my sister and I got out of bed, walked to the window and looked, and sure enough we saw a deer on the deck. This was normal in Montana, so after admiring the beautiful little animal for a while, we laid back down on the bed and fell asleep again, or rather my sister and I, because apparently my cousin stayed awake looking at it for a while longer, and about 20 minutes later, woke us up saying he thought there was now a person. At that point my sister and I looked at each other very confused, but we stood up again and looked out to see what it was. So we looked and saw a shadow moving across our terrace, and it was clearly that of a person. It looked like the silhouette of a tall, thin man. When we saw this we started to freak out, but then we saw what appeared to be 2 green laser lights. They were just 2 little pinpoint lights coming from the guy's head area. We all thought they were binoculars. By this time we were on high alert, and our eyes had adjusted a bit to the darkness, so we could clearly make out that it was a guy looking out our kitchen window. I was too scared to go upstairs to tell my parents about the guy snooping around, so we used my cousin's cell phone and called the home phone. We had a cell phone at the time, so it rang loudly, and then we saw the guy running full speed off the deck. As soon as he got away, the 3 of us ran screaming up the stairs and told my dad everything we saw. He called the police, and upon arrival, the officers searched every street, but never found the guy. But this is where things get creepy, because just 2 weeks earlier, the city police station sent out several notices in our neighborhood, telling us that a person of interest to justice, a dangerous predator who had a warrant out for his arrest, had been spotted in our area. The guy was presumed to be staying with a family member 3 blocks from us. I remember this because my mom, who was a little paranoid about the whole thing, once took us to the home address listed on the notice and made us very aware that this was going on. We weren't allowed to ride our bikes outside for several weeks. I remember looking at the house every time we passed by, but it turns out that about 2 or 3 months after the incident, this same man was arrested for the abductions, abuse, and subsequent murder of 2 children and their family in Idaho, just 2 hours from our neighborhood. But most disturbing and terrifying is that in some of his interrogations he confesses to having stalked the children by watching their homes at night with night vision goggles. The same green lights we saw that night. Also, I once found an obscure website that had some of his rights, where he talked about living in Montana at various times, and also that just before he killed this family, he was looking for children to kidnap, and we were the same age as the children he kidnapped. Story 5. Frank's haunted house. I have known Frank all my life, and we have always been best friends since we were in kindergarten, I would say. Over the years, we've had any number of sleepovers at each other's house, sometimes because my parents were away, sometimes because Frank needed help with school, or we just wanted to hang out. There have been so many reasons over time. We didn't even need them anymore. We just really liked spending time together. Frank and his family got their house when his grandmother passed away a few years ago. It's a one-story house, but it's pretty big, with lots of rooms and extra spaces like most houses. When you walk in the front door, there is a long hallway about 20 to 25 feet, and there are doors leading to other rooms. At the end of the hallway on the left side, there is a room we call the studio. This is a fairly large living room connected to a dining room and kitchen. On the right side of the hallway there is a door leading to a guest room, but it is now used for storage. Frank has lived in that house for a long time, and he has told me about some strange things he has seen and felt there, things like someone watching him, and he also often hears strange noises. I remember one time we were all in Frank's mom's office, which was across the street. She was explaining some things to us about an exam we had the next day, but at one point I really needed to use the bathroom, so I asked Frank's mom if I could go, and she kindly handed me the keys to her house, which as I said was right across the street. I admit I was a bit of a nervous kid, and I was easily scared by those things, so when she told me I had to go to her house alone, I wasn't too happy to say. The thing is that as far as I can remember, I was using the bathroom in my friend's house, when suddenly the bathroom fan turned on by itself. You can imagine what my reaction would be when I saw that. Is that I almost had a heart attack. I hurried to finish and got out of there as fast as I could. A few years later, in 2014, I went much more often to Frank's house, hoping to see more strange things happen, because at that stage I was obsessed with paranormal phenomena and mediums programs and stuff. And the truth is that, from that year until the end of 2015, I had seen enough strange things to make me hesitate to go back to that house. But let's slow down. Let's start in mid-2014. It was July 2014 and Frank and I were 13 years old. So of course we liked to do some stupid things, and we usually stayed up late. That's kind of the syndrome of that age. Anyway, as I told you, in that period I used to stay at my friend's house very often. And although his mother always fought us to go to bed, we usually slept in the study, because the recliners there were much more comfortable than any of the beds in the house. Our routine was pretty much the same all the time. Frank would fall asleep, and I would lie restless all night until I finally passed out from sleep. The couches were against the wall, so you could see the rest of the living room and dining room. When everything was completely dark, it was easy to get scared, especially when you could see into the kitchen, because it led to another room further down the hall, which was filled with creepy old dolls that they kept from Frank's father's years as a stage actor. I remember lying there once thinking about something I don't remember right now, but I know I was trying to fall asleep like all the time. I was only a few feet away from Frank, and he was sound asleep. Then I started to feel a slight breeze and a blast of cold air. I pulled the covers over me thinking it was just a draft, but then I saw something out of the corner of my eye and heard a faint whisper that sounded like it was right next door. I guess I don't even have to explain that I didn't get much sleep that night, but things like that kept happening after that, and eventually I started to get used to it. However, there was one night that things definitely got out of control, and it was so scary that from that day on, it was months before I ever set foot in that place again. This happened in early 2015, so Frank and I were playing Halo 4, when we decided to go to the and get some refreshments. On our way out, we closed the door behind us, but when we came back later, the door was wide open. We didn't think much of it, and went inside to continue playing on his Xbox 360 for a couple more hours. We finally decided it was getting late, and it was time for bed, so we turned off the games and went straight to the bedroom. His bed was pretty big, so we both slept on opposite sides. About 30 minutes passed, and Frank was already asleep as usual, and I was about to fall asleep too, when I heard a slight rustling sound. I looked up and saw that his door was wide open as before, as I really didn't like being able to see down the hallway, which looked like a dark hole in the house. I got up to close the door, but about 10 minutes later I heard the door open again. By then I was really scared, and for the rest of the night all I could hear was the door creaking back and forth, and this made me feel so terrified, I finally called my mom to pick me up. I had definitely had enough. Since then, I learned not to mess with the paranormal, because by trying to satisfy your curiosity, you might just get nightmares for years to come. I learned this, and I hope you will too. When I lived in the state of Florida, I had a best friend who, for the purposes of the story, I will call him Billy, as I do not wish to reveal his true identity. Billy and I used to sleep over at each other's house almost every weekend, and sometimes even during the week when we didn't have school. This all started in the summer, when we were on vacation and had all day to hang out. Back then I had a few friends who lived closer to me, but not many. Because I didn't like to socialize too much, I've always been a few friends, plus most of the other students in my high school were kind of weird, so my only close friend was Billy. That day my friend asked me if I wanted to spend the night at his house, and of course I said yes. At that time I was already at his house, because that afternoon he asked me to help him repair his bike, so I didn't need to go anywhere. Billy lived with her family and had 2 dogs and a kitten. One of her dogs was a huge, intimidating Rottweiler, and he always made me a little nervous, but once I got to know him, I realized he was giant and gentle at the same time, and he loved to cuddle with us. Anyway, that night we played video games for about 3 hours and then went for a walk. There was a really creepy guy who lived nearby, and we were passing by his house just then. This was a guy I heard really bad stories about, but he never really scared me that much. Another thing about him was that he never had a car or anything. Instead, he always rode his bike everywhere. Billy and I were on our way to a local store to buy drinks and fried stuff to watch a movie. But when we arrived we saw that this one was closed. Also the other stores had already closed, and Walmart was too far to walk, so we had no choice but to go back. We hurried to get home without anything happening and started watching our movie, but in the middle of that, one of Billy's friends called him and asked him for help with something, which I don't remember right now what it was. But I know Billy went to help his friend, and told me that I could use his computer to watch more movies or play games while he came back. At that point it was almost 2 a.m., so I decided to watch a horror movie to pass the time. About an hour later, Billy's Rottweiler suddenly started freaking out and barking very loudly toward the door. I was sitting on a couch, which was located next to a window and practically facing the front door of the house. And when I looked out the window I managed to see a guy on a motorcycle who was parked outside, sitting on the bike and looking at me. Now I thought maybe he was one of Billy's neighbors who came to her house for some reason, but then I started to feel uneasy because he wasn't moving at all. Fear started to creep up on me, so I went to the kitchen to grab a knife, and when I returned to the front door, the guy was still standing there. Normally I wouldn't act aggressively towards anyone unless he posed a serious threat to me or my friends. The guy just stood there motionless for about 10 minutes. I finally opened the door and stood halfway outside, ready to run back if necessary. Then we stared at each other for another 3 minutes or so. Then he flashed a half smile that for some reason I thought was creepy and lifted up the jacket he was wearing, and when he did, I felt my stomach sink. He was carrying a concealed weapon in the waistband of his pants. Seeing this, my face must have gone white as a sheet. 1,000 scenarios started running through my head, and in all of them I was getting shot. I felt terrified. However, before I started to run, he started the engine of his motorcycle, smiled mockingly at me, and sped down the road. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that guy had left me with. About 20 minutes later, Billy finally returned. I hurriedly told him everything that happened, but he tried to reassure me by suggesting that it could have just been a random jerk who wanted to annoy me, assuring me that if he had intended to attack me, he would have. Then he went to his room. I decided to sleep in the living room, and it took me a long time to finally fall asleep. The next day, as was quite usual, we woke up, had breakfast, and played some video games. Later, when the computer was free, I took the opportunity to get on Facebook, something I hadn't done in a few days. Then I found a post from one of my friends, who also lived in that neighborhood. She was telling that she woke up in the middle of the night and looked out the window next to her bed, and then she saw a strange guy sitting on a motorcycle and looking right at her. Although I don't know if it was the same guy, I was really shocked by that. Fortunately, that was my only encounter with the gun-toting stranger. This happened to me and my 2 friends when we were 14 and 15 years old. That day we slept over at my house, and my parents were upstairs while we were all in the basement. My basement was spacious, it was clean and well lit, and it looked like any other room in my house, so we weren't scared or anything. We were doing typical teenage foolishness when one of my friends came up with the bright idea to sneak out. We all got very quiet. We were very young, so we all had early curfews and never went out after 10 o'clock at night. There used to be many occasions when my other friends would invite me out, but they wouldn't let me because it was too late, so I was totally fine with the idea that we weren't going to do anything too crazy, just walk around and play some music, just something quiet, nothing that would draw too much attention, nothing that could put us in danger. We waited until my parents were asleep. I did this pretending to grab some food from the kitchen, but in reality, I was checking to see if I could see the light in their room on while they slept with the door open. It was off and I didn't hear them, so I was sure this was the time. I went back to the basement and told my friends we waited 10 more minutes just in case, and then we all quietly walked out the front door. Fortunately, my front door doesn't creak or make any noise. You just have to close it quietly, so you don't hear the characteristic click of the lock. I lived in a rural area, so there was a forest in front of my house, and we definitely weren't going to walk there, so we walked down the road parallel to the forest. We just ended up walking in the middle of the road, because the road was completely desolate at this hour. We started singing some songs, not too loud to wake anyone up, but loud enough to be fun. Our plan included that we were going to walk to a nearby 7-Eleven about 15 minutes away. That's when my friend Ray got an airdrop notification on his phone. This was strange. There didn't seem to be anyone around, or at least we couldn't see anyone. Ray checked the notification, and it was a picture of us walking down the street. We looked in the direction of where the photo was, and realized it had been taken from somewhere in the woods, but it was too dark to see anything. The thought of someone watching us in the woods was too scary. Ray and my other friend Jason started swearing at the person in the woods as a way to get them to come out, telling them to show their face or send another airdrop to reveal their location, but nothing happened. We picked up the pace and turned off the music. We made it to the 7-Eleven with no problems, but we were still intrigued by the photo and how strange that was. We left the 7-Eleven and watched our backs. We were thinking of going for a ride to our high school, but we were too freaked out by the photo, so the getaway wasn't turning out as fun as we had hoped, so we were ready to head home. After walking around a bit, Ray got another airdrop notification. My heart started racing immediately, and when he opened it, it was a picture of us again, but taken from behind. It was now very blurry, as if it had been taken very quickly, so as not to get caught. This person was actually behind us. We all looked back, and all we saw was a car parked on the side of the road, which was the only place this person could have hidden in that short space of time. I told my friends about this, and they started insulting the invisible man again, only now they were saying really vulgar things to him. And that's when something really creepy happened, out of nowhere, and a voice started singing in a creepy way. From behind the car, they were psychopathically singing a song that said, you better run before it's too late." They sang the same line over and over again in this really scary voice, and upon hearing this, we all ran back to my house as fast as we could. Fortunately, we weren't followed, but what happened was too scary. We never told our parents, obviously because we didn't want to tell on ourselves, so we kept quiet. When I was a kid, before we lived in Texas, we lived in a home that had this huge backyard in Georgia that made me feel like the most popular kid in class. Anytime playing outdoor games or sports was ever an idea, my backyard would be the spot to go since we had a 2-acre backyard. The backyard was surrounded by woods on 3 sides. It also had many trees throughout the yard, a trampoline in one corner, a hot tub, a big detached 3-car garage, and an above-ground pool. For a middle-class area, we really had everything you could want in a backyard. There was enough open grass to play any sports, soccer, baseball, football, anything. We even played hide-and-seek tag, or manhunt, as we would call it. One Friday, when we were in like 6th grade, my friends and I wanted to have a camp-out sleepover in my backyard. It was Mike, other Mike, who I'll call Michael, and Jason. We all had to get our parents' permissions, of course, but we were like 11 or 12, and it was a Friday. None of our parents had any reason to say no. Plus, my family has lots of camping equipment, including 2 tents that could easily fit 2 of us in each one. After all of us got permission from our parents, we made arrangements for them to get to my house around 5, so we could play sports in the backyard. We had 2 mini soccer nets in the yard that we used to play soccer 2-on-2. We did that for like half an hour. Then we played baseball for another maybe half hour. And after just sitting around for a few minutes regaining our energy, my parents ordered pizza for us, so we ate around 6:30 or 7 if I had to guess. The sun was starting to go down a little bit now, so now came the time to set up the tents before it was too dark. I was pretty good with setting up tents because I was a Boy Scout and we just recently learned how to set up tents. My friends kind of helped, but I did most of the work. By the time they were done, it was decently dark out. The backyard lights were on, giving a nice glow. It was now dark enough for us to play our favorite game, Manhunt. There were a million spots to hide in the backyard. We played in pairs. It was Mike and I hiding first, and Michael and Jason would be hunting. Mike and I split up. Our goal was to get back to the home base point, which was the back door to the house. No camping by the door was allowed. The trampoline was in a far corner of the yard before the woods. I crawled under that to hide. When the hunters would start looking, they had to blow a whistle to let the hiders know they were starting. Once I heard the whistle, I stayed under the trampoline waiting it out, watching the two of them in the distance looking around. I was waiting for a good moment to creep closer to the back door. I had my sights on the hot tub, which was right next to the house. If I could make it over to hide behind the hot tub, I could straight line beeline it to the back door. So when both Michael and Jason had their backs to me looking in different areas of the backyard, I sprinted towards the hot tub, and just as I got right behind it and ducked down, I heard one of the trash bins on the side of the house almost topple over, and then I noticed the motion detecting light on the side turn on. The hot tub was by that corner of the house, but it wouldn't have triggered that light. I went to peer around the corner to the side yard, and I saw a tall person dressed in dark clothes speed walking away in the direction of the woods, before entering the woods. It wasn't my dad. I ran to my friends and called the game off, then went to tell my dad about it. We came out and looked around the woods for a few minutes, and then checked the street for any unusual cars. Nothing and nothing. He said we should sleep inside tonight, which obviously bummed us out. We went inside and just played a game on my PlayStation. I again described to my friends what I saw, just some tall guy walking into the woods on the side of the house, after apparently almost knocking over one of our trash bins. We talked about just going back outside and sleeping in the tent since they were already set up anyway. And plus, what were the odds whoever that was still out there hours later? After we finished playing our game, we went back outside quietly to not wake my dad up. It's not like we were hiding the fact that we were going back out there, but we didn't want to advertise it either. We each had a sleeping bag. Mike and I shared a tent, while Michael and Jason shared the other. After a while of joking around and yelling things between tents, we started to quiet down and try to go to sleep. I wasn't asleep yet, but it seemed like Mike was. I started hearing walking sounds in the grass nearby, approaching the tent, and then the zipper to the tent was unzipped, and I looked up and saw my dad looking inside the tent. He said, "What are you guys doing out here?" I replied to him something like, "They wanted to sleep out here, so we came back out." Then I took a closer look at the face peering into the tent. I realized it wasn't my dad, but some complete stranger who looked to be my dad's age. It looked like he was about to come in when I screamed bloody murder like a little girl. Everyone woke up, and Mike started to scream as well. The man grabbed our ankles and said to be quiet, but he gave up when he realized he was about to be exposed. He left the tent and disappeared. I told my friends to run inside the house, and as we were running to the house, my dad was already coming out the back door in response to our screams. I told him I don't know which way he went, but that the man from before was back. My dad ran around the yard screaming and taunting the creep to come back if he has any balls. We heard it from inside the living room. My mom called the police, of course, and all that really happened when the police officer showed up was he took my recount of what happened, and I'm sure he made a police report then left. It was good to have a police report at least so that the cops would be aware of a creep going around. I'm not sure if that man ever came back to our property or not, or if he ever got in trouble for something similar. Either way, it was pretty traumatizing, and it could have gone much worse. This was back a few years, sometime in 2019. I was at a friend's house. I'll call her M for the sake of the story. I was pretty excited for this sleepover. I couldn't wait to talk about all the middle school drama. Now, something you might want to know is M's house was deep in the woods. I mean deep. Anywhere you looked there was woods, and their nearest neighbor was about a half-mile away, but on the backside of her house was a cliff that led down to the ocean. The night at M's house started off pretty good. Our friend Sam was there too. We played truth or dare, hide and seek, and other teenage games. It was getting pretty late, but we decided to go on a walk down the gravel road that led to the other houses along the way. We asked her mom, and she said yes, so we started walking. After another 10 to 15 minutes, we saw a man who was walking on the other side of the street towards us. At first, we weren't thinking much. Maybe this dude was just taking an evening walk as well. But something that didn't seem right was that this man was wearing pretty thick clothing. I'm talking it almost looked like snow gear, and not to mention it was pretty warm out. At that moment, it was like 60 degrees outside. We all looked at each other as we passed the guy, and that's when it hit us. The stench. The disgusting smell coming off that guy. It was absolutely horrible. Words could not describe how disgusting that smell was. It was so bad that after we finally got a few feet away, my friend took a deep breath, almost like she had been holding it. One of my friends ran into the woods and almost threw up. At this point, we felt it was best to head back. Our friend, who almost threw up, was begging to go back anyway. We all agreed that it would be the best idea to head back. On our way back, we passed him again. This time we held our breath before we passed him, but when we looked back, we realized he was no longer walking in the opposite direction, but instead he was following us. This was really annoying. That disgusting smelling man was now bringing his stench even closer. We had no choice but to speed up our pace. We started speed walking. We still had about a mile to make it back to M's house. As we began to speed up, so did the random disgusting smelling dude. We all looked at each other, scared and annoyed. We picked up our pace even more, almost to the point where we were jogging, but of course the man sped up even more. Now at this point we were running, and my friend Sam looked back, and then we heard it. Sam let out a blood-curdling scream as she looked back, which caused Em and I to look back as well, and what we saw, still to this day, absolutely horrifies me. This man was full-on sprinting at us. He had what looked like a knife or something sharp in his grasp. Sam and I started screaming as we were sprinting down the road. Our screams caused him to stop chasing us, and he eventually just stopped. But he didn't move, he just stood still, watching as we left. He didn't stay around to see what his intentions were. We just ran straight back to Em's house. Once we got back, we slammed the door and decided on not telling her parents, as they were already asleep. We all went to the living room to finish setting up our sleeping areas. A few hours passed. It was about 2 a.m. at this point. We were watching something, I can't remember what, but I know it was some horror movie. Now I mentioned her house was on a cliff for a reason. Because of this, her house has a lot of windows on the backside overlooking the view. I was sitting on one of the couches that was set up right at the window. It was pitch black outside. All you could hear was the waves and occasional wind. All of a sudden, I heard footsteps outside. They sounded like they were right by the window. I told my friends, and Em said it was probably the deer that always comes by. For 2 years now, Em had been feeding this deer, who always came up to this very window. I got pretty excited, as this meant this deer would come right up to my hand. I decided to look out the window, and I didn't see anything. It was too dark. I said that we should go outside to pet the deer, but Em and Sam said no. They reminded me about what happened earlier, and I agreed. So we went back to watching the movie. Another hour passed, and we were all feeling tired. We turned off the TV and headed under our blankets. It was about 45 minutes later. Em and Sam were fast asleep. But I felt like I couldn't rest. Something was up. I had this gut feeling that told me not to go to sleep, so I decided to look outside. The moon was just bright enough that you could see the ocean. So I spent a few minutes just staring outside. As I was staring outside, my eye caught something moving in the woods over to the left. I turned my head that way, but I saw nothing. I knew I saw something moving, so I grabbed a flashlight that was on the bookshelf, and I pointed it in the direction of where I saw the movement. Now this was probably the worst idea I could have ever had, because when I did so, I saw that man again, but this time he didn't have any snow gear on. Instead, he was completely shirtless, and I wasn't about to find out what else he didn't have on. So I tried to wake up Em and Sam and tell them what I saw. Sam woke up, but Em was a deep sleeper. I told Sam to look outside, but when we looked, he was gone. Sam looked at me with a pretty angry expression, like I was just messing with her. I told her I wasn't, but she didn't believe me. She went back to bed, and I was left laying there. It was now about 4:30 in the morning. It was still dark outside. I didn't sleep at all. I felt myself drifting off to sleep when I heard a knock on the door. I almost jumped off the couch when I heard it. I knew I shouldn't open it, but my curiosity got the best of me. I walked over to the door and looked out of the peephole, and again I saw nothing. My head had to be playing with me. I again went back to the couch and threw my blanket over my head. I eventually fell asleep, but woke up at around 5 a.m. in a cold sweat. Something wasn't right again. My body wouldn't stop shaking. Then it hit me. That familiar stench. That disgusting smell. I almost threw up right there, but as fast as I sat up, I heard footsteps coming towards me, and I screamed. I flicked on the flashlight, and as I did, I saw him. The man from earlier, standing in the corner of the room. I scream woke up Em and Sam, and they screamed too, and as we did this, the man bolted out of the house. M's mom and dad came running down the stairs, and after a few minutes, we told them everything that happened. M's mom called the cops, while M's dad walked down the road with a shotgun, seeing if he could find the man. After that, once the police arrived and got all of our stories, I went home. My parents didn't tell me much when I got home. They hugged me for what felt like hours, and from that moment, I wasn't allowed at sleepovers anymore. Only now, years later, did I finally realize just how bad everything was. The police eventually found the guy, and inside that old shed we were daring each other to go into were 5 dead bodies, and that stench that was on that man's body was the smell of decaying flesh. And if things didn't go the way they went, in the end, my friends and I would have ended up in that shed. I work in risk management for a big bank in Manhattan. I've met a lot of cool people through this job. I go out to happy hour all the time with my coworkers. In 2019, a new guy named Sebastian was transferred to our office. I met him on his first day in the office. He seemed very sociable and talkative, and he'd always be laughing and smiling. He went out to happy hour with us that Friday, and he truly was the life of the party, always talking about all of his experiences, all the places he's been and things he's done. There was not a dull moment with him. Eventually, Sebastian and I became friendly, and we went out together once in a while on weekends. I came to realize the more I got to know him, that a lot of what he said may have been fabrications. His stories about all these beautiful women he allegedly got with, all these stories of hanging with celebrities. I started to just take everything that he said with a grain of salt, but I kept hanging with him because he was just easy to hang out with and kind of funny. Sebastian one day invited me to go with him and his sister to their condo in St. Pete Beach, Florida. His mom is very wealthy, owning a place in Beverly Hills, Colorado, and St. Pete. She wouldn't be at the condo this particular weekend, so Sebastian said it would be fun. I invited my little brother to come along too. We all took the same flight. I met Sebastian's sister at the airport. She seemed pretty interesting. Hard to explain, but she was a bit quirky. The condo was actually decently nice. It had 3 bedrooms. I'd never been in a condo with 3 bedrooms before. Sebastian and his sister took a room each, so my brother Tyler and I shared a room. I told him if we meet any girls, he's sleeping on the couch though. Since we landed late, it was past beach hour. We went out to some beach bars which were pretty cool. It was a bit of an older crowd. Sebastian was getting really drunk really fast though for some reason. It was a chill vibe. I wasn't sure why he was downing shots. I had to tell him to slow down when he started getting aggressive with people. This was the first time I'd seen him like this. He was also going up to every last girl he saw and drunkenly hitting on them. And 9 times out of 10, the girls seemed uncomfortable. Tyler and I laughed until it wasn't funny anymore, and it was more so embarrassing being seen with him. At one point, a bigger guy got in his face for talking to his girl, and I had to pull Sebastian away and apologize to the guy to de-escalate things. As we walked away, Sebastian pushed me and called me a piece of shit for not having his back. Tyler and I told him to just calm down. Even his sister was telling him to relax. Sebastian stormed off. I'm assuming back to the condo. His sister didn't say anything and just followed. This was an extremely bizarre start to the weekend. Tyler and I stayed and finished our drinks. These girls even came up to us and asked how we knew him, making a joke of it. We actually got their numbers. They were visiting too. They said they're going downtown later if we wanted to meet up. And we said we were down. So after that, I texted Sebastian asking where they went, and he texted back immediately that they went back to the condo. Tyler and I walked back to the condo and let ourselves in. We expected Sebastian to be angry, but instead, the second we walked in, he jumped off the couch all excited like with a big smile on his face saying, "Are we going out tonight or what?" He was still definitely really drunk. I told him, yeah, we should chill out here for a bit first though. Then I told him about the girls' numbers we got. Sebastian asked how many girls, and I said 2. His smile disappeared. Then Tyler for some reason told him that the girls came up to us after he left, asking how we knew you. I think he was saying it as a joke, kind of trying to playfully rip on him a bit, which was a mistake. Sebastian stormed away into his room and literally slammed the door shut. I was realizing he must be extremely bipolar or something. I was getting off vibes now from both of them. I whispered to his sister, "Is he always like this?" And she replied, "Like what?" in a very standoffish way. "Never mind," I said. This was extremely uncomfortable. I was hoping maybe Sebastian would sober up and tomorrow would be better. Tyler and I chilled in our room for a little while. Sebastian never came out. I went over and knocked on the door and asked if he wanted to come out with us. He didn't answer. So we eventually Ubered without them to meet those two girls at some big clubby bar. As I was getting drunker, Sebastian started blowing up my phone with things like, "Where are you? How could you just leave me here? Your stuff is going in the street. Don't come back. I don't know why I invited you here." I showed Tyler and the girls, and everyone was concerned. Something was wrong with Sebastian, and he was showing it now. As much fun as we were having with the girls, we had to Uber back to the condo before Sebastian really did something stupid. When we got back, Sebastian was just sitting on the couch alone looking at the wall. I asked if he was okay. He looked at me, then looked away and said, "Yeah, hope you had fun." Then he got up and went to his room and shut the door. Whatever. We went to bed. Tyler and I just stayed up talking to each other for like half an hour about Sebastian and about life in general. Then suddenly we heard footsteps on the wood floor outside. We stopped talking. The footsteps came over to the door, then stopped. We both heard it. I spoke up to Tyler on the top bunk, whispering that Sebastian is right outside the door. He whispered back, "I know." He must have had his ear up to the door or something listening to us. We didn't say a word. A literal 5 minutes go by before we heard his footsteps walk away from the door. Then we heard him talking outside. He was laughing and saying stuff, but we didn't hear his sister saying anything. I wanted to see who he was talking to, so I crept over to the door and opened it. I looked into the living room, which was dark, but I saw Sebastian in the corner leaning on the wall with one hand and his head down. He was laughing and talking to himself. I heard him say, "Joe is always such a stupid bitch." And then he laughed again. "My name is Joe." I closed the door quietly and went back to the bottom bunk. I whispered to Tyler what I just saw, and his response was simply, "What the fuck?" I told him we should leave tomorrow morning and get a hotel, and he agreed. We tried to go to sleep, but the talking and laughing outside went on for another 10 to 15 minutes. When it finally stopped, we heard the footsteps come outside the door again, stop for a minute, then go to his room, and then we heard his door shut. Finally, we felt comfortable going to sleep. By now I was shot. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but I woke up probably only 20 minutes later. I sat up, knowing something woke me up. I looked at the door, and in front of it was Sebastian standing there. I jumped and said, "Yo, what are you doing?" He then lunged at the bed, screaming, trying to apparently strangle me, yelling, "You're a piece of shit." Tyler had to grab him off of me and throw him into the corner of the room. Sebastian yelled that "You suck, Joe. I invited you here just for you to shit on my life and talk shit about me to my sister." I of course tried to calm him down and rationalize, but there was no rationalizing with crazy. We packed our shit and called an Uber to a hotel, where we stayed until Sunday, then flew home. I saw Sebastian in the office the following few weeks, but he always avoided talking to me or looking at me. And he eventually transferred to a different office, probably because of me. Sebastian seemed cool and normal at first, but he was an example of a very sick, damaged person deep down. That night we spent in his condo absolutely terrified me.